Chapter 1328. If he couldn't see, what would happen? One was that the ignorant were fearless. If he couldn't see, he wouldn't know what it was. He could just stuff it down his throat. Another was that he couldn't see, but could feel. That was when his imagination ran wild. And the more he thought about it, the scarier it became. If one saw how Poplar Fruit took a big bite of the spoon that Kiki handed to him and chewed it with all his might, then continued eating and chewing, everyone would think that Poplar Fruit was the first type. But who knew that Poplar Fruit was actually the second type? The moment the crispy cicadas entered his mouth, he could feel it. This texture was definitely that of an insect. Poplar Fruit already knew that something was wrong. His muscles automatically reacted by chewing twice, and he could immediately tell that there were many legs and wings, and they weren't small. What was this? It couldn't be those green flies, could it? Thinking of this, Poplar Fruit wanted to vomit, but he couldn't vomit. The competition was still in progress. He had chosen to participate in the competition, so he had to eat it even if he had to hold back his tears. Indeed, Poplar Fruit's nose twitched, and his eyes turned red under the red cloth. He was about to cry. What was there to be afraid of? Eat. He had already started eating flies. What was there to be afraid of? Not only did he want to eat, he also wanted to win. Otherwise, if he lost after putting in so much effort, he would really lose everything. Hence, Poplar Fruit began stuffing it down under everyone's gaze. He did not dare to chew too much, afraid that he would be too disgusted. He swallowed it down after a few chews, and his speed was astonishing. A few fathers who had regained their senses were still shouting, pour it all down." Poplar Fruit also responded to everyone's shouts. Without waiting for his daughter to feed him, he picked up the plate and poured it into his mouth. Of course, a lot of it fell out of his mouth and onto the table. He felt someone move behind his head, and Poplar Fruit's eyes suddenly lit up. The audience saw that it was the village chief. He was so naughty that he had unshackled Poplar Fruit's eyes midway, allowing him to look directly at what he was eating. He should be afraid now, right? However, Poplar Fruit was indifferent. Instead, he ate even faster. Why? Because Poplar Fruit saw it clearly. He realized that he was eating cicada. When he was young, he often went to catch cicadas with his friends. How could he not know him? Of course, Poplar Fruit had never eaten cicadas before, but he knew that someone had eaten cicadas before, and he had also drunk Chinese medicine made from cicadas. That is the molted shell of cicadas. However, this discovery still lifted Poplar Fruit's spirits. No matter what, cicada was still better than the flies he had imagined. After eating the Poplar Fruit, he became more courageous. Moreover, at this time, Poplar Fruit also recovered. It doesn't seem too bad, does it? No, it should be said that the taste was not bad. Although it looked disgusting, after soaking in salt water and frying it in oil, it smelled fragrant and tasted fragrant and crispy. It was no worse than those snacks. It was just that many people found it difficult to accept. Of course, Poplar Fruit was stuffing himself at this time. He didn't care about tasting it carefully, but after he put down the psychological burden, Poplar Fruit ate faster. You have to eat those that fall on the table, the village chief reminded. Poplar Fruit used both hands. Kiki also helped her father. She stood on her tiptoes and helped her father gather the scattered cicadas on the table. Then, Poplar Fruit grabbed them and stuffed them into his mouth. Although at the beginning, Kiki was indeed a few seconds slower because she was afraid, and although Poplar Fruit was indeed not as calm as the villager brother next to him, Poplar Fruit still took the first place with his storm-like eating speed. Yeah, Poplar Fruit smiled and high-fived with the other fathers and his daughter to celebrate. This could be considered as getting off to a good start. The village chief asked his fellow villagers and announced the source of the dish. It was really cicada. However, the children's reactions were very strong. Dejun said that he ate cicada. Nuai frowned and said with a bodhisattva's heart, "Aya, you're not allowed to eat cicada. It's too disgusting. I also don't want my daddy to suddenly turn into a big bird and fly away." Kiki's imagination was also running wild. She frowned and nervously grabbed her father's clothes, as if her father was really going to fly away. There's no such thing. Poplar Fruit smiled and patted his daughter's head and said, "Why would Daddy turn into a bird?" The children chatted and had all kinds of reactions. Kong Kong and Xian Xian were not afraid. Xian Xian even said that she wanted to eat it. It was indeed the nature of foodie. De Jun grabbed Nuo, and continued with his imagination running wild. "I saw a bird in the zoo that liked to eat big white maggots." These words did not scare the other children. For example, Kiki did not even know what maggots looked like. However, it scared Lu Yi, who was beside her, until his face turned pale. "How do you feel?" Lu Yi pulled Poplar Fruit and asked with a smile. "Actually, it's not bad." Poplar Fruit nodded and smiled. "It looks disgusting, but it's not the same when you eat it. It's quite delicious." He even deliberately licked his lips, causing Lu Ye's face to turn even paler. But was it really like what Poplar Fruit said? In fact, when Poplar Fruit was later interviewed, he first shivered. Then he spoke about his psychological journey from fear to determination. It was really a lot of snot and tears. Whose turn would it be next? Louis did not dare to go up. He planned to observe for a while more. Then, Hu Jun steeled his heart and walked forward. I'll go. The second one might not be this," Zhou Shimin said to Hu Jun. When the village chief opened the lid, everyone could see clearly what medicine was being sold. Mango, although they were yellow and looked like worms. Hu Jun's nose was wrinkled as he ate them. In fact, they were just thin strips of mango. Of course, it was not only the mango. Only Hu Jun, who had eaten them, knew that there was something else added in it, like chili. Go for it. A few children shouted from the side. As it was not some strange insect, they were not that afraid and shouted very enthusiastically. Kiki was even more enthusiastic. She shouted with all her might to this uncle she liked. Even the little girl's fair skin was blushing from shouting. It was a close match, but because Hu Jun had his blindfold removed from his eyes by the village chief, he was able to use both hands and was faster than his opponent. He obtained a second victory. How rare. The fathers were actually able to obtain 2 victories in a row. Just as the fathers were cheering, and Hu Jun was proudly talking about the taste of the mango. After all, it was not worms. The little glutton, Xian Xian, actually stretched out her short hands to take the mango leftovers on the table. Of course, he could not take it. Kiki stood beside him and helped him take a piece. Then, she also took a piece and stuffed it into her mouth. When the little glutton met the little glutton, the two of them began to secretly eat. Aya! Kiki and Xian Xian's expressions suddenly changed. Kiki even spat out the leftovers to the side and fanned her mouth. It was too spicy. Who asked you to be greedy? Poplar Fruit did not know whether to laugh or cry as he looked for water for his daughter. Chapter 1329. After winning 2 matches in a row, who knew that they would lose 2 matches in a row? Next, Lin Yongjian and Zhou Shimin both lost when they were eating the grasshopper and scallion sauce. The grasshopper was needless to say. Even though Lin Yongjian had the same feelings as Poplar Fruit and was determined to eat the disgusting food, the speed at which he ate the grasshopper was nothing to be proud of. Halfway through, he was eating and spitting. The cameraman standing in front of him was almost sprayed with insect residue. However, after this, the 2 little gluttons, Xian Xian and Kiki, bravely tried the grasshopper. Xian Xian wanted to eat it first, so Zhou Shimin picked one up from the table and stuffed it into his mouth. Kiki saw it and also wanted to eat it. How was the taste? Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. Delicious. Everyone looked at the strange grasshopper, but Kiki ate it with relish. Perhaps because it was really delicious, Xian Xian nodded and said, It's very delicious. Let's not talk about how disgusting the grasshopper Zhou Shimin ate was. It was different from the previous food. It was like a soup cooked with scallion sauce, which made the fathers somewhat confused. Xian Xian then used a spoon to feed him the soup. Not only did he spill some of it, but he also ate it very slowly. On the other hand, the Dai villagers were more experienced. They directly picked up a small bowl and poured it into their mouths. Just like that, they finished it. Shimin, tell us how it feels. The village chief pulled Zhou Shimin, who was eating with a bitter face, and asked, What else could it feel like? Disgusting. Do you know what the grasshopper was made of? In addition to the spicy spices that were unique to Dai Village, there was also beef tripe, wild scallion, and even the grass juice taken from the tail of an ox. This was grass that had been eaten by an ox, and the stomach juice had not been regurgitated. After listening to the village chief's explanation, everyone's face turned green. Can this thing be eaten? It can really eat. The Dai family regarded it as a very important summer food. Furthermore, it had cooling and detoxifying effects, so people who drank it rarely fell sick. However, people who didn't understand it would feel like eating shit when they ate it, because there was a very bitter juice from the small intestine of the cow added in it. It was spicy and bitter. No wonder Zhou Shimin wanted to vomit. While the adults were complaining, the children didn't seem to feel anything. They were still having fun. Kong Kong was alone again. He wandered outside the group and found a long water trough beside him. It was made of wood and looked like a canoe. The little boy stepped in with interest and sat on it. In the crowd, Kiki giggled. For some reason, she was so happy that she turned around. Just like that, she inadvertently saw Brother Kong Kong sitting on the wooden boat. What's that? The little girl's gaze was actually on the wooden boat. She was very curious, so she left the group behind and walked towards Brother Kong Kong. Kong Kong was a little nervous when she saw her beautiful sister skipping over. The little boy tried his best to hide it, but his tense face was caught by the photographer. Brother Kong Kong. Kiki giggled. Her voice was as clear as a wind chime. Where did you get this? A boat. Kong Kong was so nervous that he didn't know what to say. He could only squeeze out one word. Don't boats sail in the sea? Kiki doubtfully swayed. She was looking at the long water trough, but it made Kong Kong even more nervous. Brother Kong Kong, can I sit on it too? Kong Kong did not answer, so Kiki asked another question. Of course, she asked this question casually. The little girl did not treat Brother Kong Kong as an outsider. Without waiting for Brother Kong Kong to nod, she reached out and pressed on Brother Kong Kong's shoulder and climbed onto the trough from behind. Kong Kong did not expect to be pressed down by his sister. At that moment, he only felt that his shoulders and body were all stiff, and he did not dare to move. And at that moment, Kong Kong could clearly feel his sister's white and rosy face approaching. Kiki's skin was really good. Her skin was moist and delicate, and because of the hot weather, her baby fat cheeks were a little red. She was super cute. Kong Kong felt that he could not hold on any longer. His tense face was about to reach his limit. He really wanted to laugh. It was not out of happiness, joy, or pride. He did not know why, but he just wanted to laugh. Hey, I'm sitting in too. Kiki sat behind Brother Kong Kong. The energetic girl looked around happily and giggled, as if there was a new perspective sitting there. Kong Kong's face was tense. He felt that he should not be so quiet. From just now until now, he had only said the word boat. Kiki did not mind Brother Kong Kong's silence. She still had a bright smile on her face. Under the photographer's gesture, she looked at the camera with Brother Kong Kong. In a midsummer dream, the boy and the girl seemed to be rowing in the park on the blue waves. They seemed to hear a familiar song. Let's paddle. It's so beautiful. It's a pity not to have a souvenir. After taking the photos, Kiki smiled and said to Brother Kong Kong, Brother Kong Kong, let's go. Doo-doo-doo-doo. The girl even mischievously imitated the sound of a steamboat. Kong Kong seemed to have found a topic to talk about. He could explain to his sister that this was not a steamboat, but a wooden one. However, when he turned his head, he saw that Sister Kiki had already stood up. The girl could not wait to jump off the boat when her long and slender legs flashed in front of his eyes. The girl shouted anxiously, Nui's Papa is going to compete. I'm going to cheer for Nui's Papa. All right, Kong Kong opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, Sister Kiki ran back, leaving him sitting there alone. The program team's editing was very good. It vividly portrayed Kong Kong's depressed and disappointed feelings. This explained one thing. One could not hesitate when chasing a girl. One could not be timid. One had to dare to speak up. Otherwise, one would miss opportunities again and again. Of course, children did not have such complicated emotions. Kong Kong sat there alone for a while. When he saw the commotion over there, he could not help but stand up to take a look. Louis was fighting with a plate of black fried centipedes. Luckily, After being fried, the centipedes did not look so ferocious. Hence, after Lu Ye's blindfold was removed, he was still eating with all his might. However, the fried centipedes were really not tasty. In Lu Ye's words, it was like chewing plastic. After eating a mouthful of it, he could not swallow it. Whoever can swallow it first will be the final victor. The village chief changed the rules of the final match. However, Lu Ye gave up. He secretly spat out the fried centipedes in his mouth. However, he did not rely on deception to win. He openly told the village chief that the other party would win. There was no other way. He could not swallow it. Although his father's team had lost 3 consecutive matches after winning, ruining their chances of winning, Lu Ye's honesty was still worthy of praise, setting an example, being an honest child. Chapter 1330. The second event was to melt the ice and retrieve the puzzle. In the end, the thick-skinned Hu Jun turned it into a broken ice and retrieved the puzzle. Although it was a little unfair, at least it saved the father's team some face. After that, they took a short break. However, the fathers and the children saw the staff strangely carrying a thick water pipe and pouring water into the wooden trough where Kong Kong and Kiki were playing. Moreover, everyone realized that there was not only one wooden trough. On the other side, there was also a long wooden trough where the Dai village team was standing. What are they doing? Kiki scratched her head and asked curiously. Maybe they are about to set sail. Kong Kong finally had the chance to answer. But Daddy. In the end, little sister Chi-Chi turned around and ran away again. She found her omniscient father and asked in confusion, Papa, why? Why did Uncle and the others load water for the boat? Why is there water in the boat? Isn't there water outside the boat? There is water in the boat because it is not a boat. Poplar Fruit shattered his daughter's fantasy and laughed. It is used to store water. Then why is it filled with water? Is it used for bathing? The little girl asked innocently. Maybe it is used for splashing water? Poplar Fruit was not too sure, but he remembered that the Dai village had a tradition of splashing water. Why is it splashing water? The little girl's questions were really endless. After a while, the village chief announced the rules of the next competition. It was really related to splashing water. The name of the competition was the water passing competition. The children would stand in a row and their father would grab their thighs to prevent them from moving. Then, one by one, they would use a wooden bucket to pass the water from the bucket. Finally, the water would be poured into a large number of cups. The team that poured the most water in the stipulated time would be the winner. The first one must have the most strength and endurance. Lu Yi said, There will not be a lot of water at the back. Try to catch as much water as you can to win. According to this strategy, Kong Kong and Hu Jun stood at the edge of the wooden trough. They were the first contestants to pass the water, while the weakest contestant, De Jun, stood at the back with Lin Yongjian. De Jun's strength had been proven on the grasslands. He couldn't even compare to brother Xian, who was 2 years younger. There was some debate about who would be second. Lu Yi felt that since Kiki was a girl, Nua, you should take the responsibility of second place. However, Poplar Fruit disagreed. He felt that his daughter was very strong. Although she was not as strong as brother Kong Kong, she still had a lot of advantages over brother Nuyi. Thinking back to when they were picking grapes, Kiki was indeed carrying a large basket by herself. Lu Yi no longer wanted to compete with Poplar Fruit for the second place. Thus, Nuo Yi stood at the third position, and the fourth position was the little meatball Xian. Everyone stood in their respective positions. The village chief shouted 3, 2, 1, and the competition officially began. In the beginning, everyone was immersed in the nervous emotions of the competition. Because of nervousness, it was natural for them to make mistakes. Moreover, Kong Kong was not even 7 years old yet. Why? Pooey. Kong Kong filled the bucket with water and threw it. Hu Jun did not help at all. In the end, Kong Kong used too much strength and splashed the water on Kiki and Poplar Fruit's faces. There was some water in the bucket, but most of it was received by Kiki and Poplar Fruit with their faces. Kiki. Kiki used one hand to wipe her face as she laughed in amusement. Kong Kong did not have the time to apologize. She turned around and splashed another bucket of water. At this time, Kiki was still wiping her face. Poplar Fruit and his daughter were drenched again. Their clothes were soaked. Poplar Fruit was holding onto his daughter's waist, so he could only shake his head to get rid of the water on his face. Kiki suffered even more. The little girl's hair was scattered by the water. A few strands curled and stuck to her cheeks playfully and cutely. "Aim, Kong Kong, aim!" Poplar Fruit saw Kong Kong coming again and quickly shouted. Fortunately, Kong Kong had adjusted herself this time, and Chi-Chi had also put her attention into it. Surprisingly, she didn't lose too much in the process. Turning around, Kiki was about to pass the water to Nua-E, but the two children seemed to be a little far apart. The little girl could not help but call out innocently, "Brother, come closer. If you can't come over, you can just fall over like this." Poplar Fruit shouted. Thus, Kiki made her move. She did not adjust well and splashed half a bucket of water, drenching Nua-E and Luye's faces. Behind, Zhou Shimin could not laugh anymore. This was really fun. How was this passing water? This was splashing water, okay? Next, Kiki received half a bucket of water from Brother Kong Kong. This time, Poplar Fruit did not dare let his daughter mess around. If she splashed water on their faces again, they would play this game until tomorrow, and most of their cups would be empty. Poplar Fruit shouted, "Kiki, use less strength. Look carefully before splashing." This time the water splashed out. Although some of it splashed on Nua-Ye's face, a large part of it still went in. Quick! After waiting for a long time, Zhou Shimin and Lin Yongjian, who did not feel like participating, finally became happy. After all, the water could finally be passed over. They did not have to stand and watch the show anymore. But before he could finish his sentence, a white water column accurately avoided the bucket and hit Zhou Shimin's face. Xuan's face was only splashed a few drops. Zhou Shimin was the most miserable. He was still laughing just now, but now it was his turn to suffer. Kiki and Kong Kong's cooperation was getting better and better. After all, they were not weak and could always pass the water that was splashed out. Kiki was also getting more and more used to it. Every time she splashed out, most of the water would go into Nua-Ye's bucket. But when it came to Nua-Ye, it was as if there was a fault. He could not pass the water out no matter how many times he tried. Either he was too weak and fell on the grass, or he used too much strength and fell on Xuan's face. Xian's round face was also dripping with water. Her instant noodle hair had almost turned into cooked instant noodles. He poured a little water over to Dejun. In the end, Dejun only received a few drops of water. Lin Yongjian sighed. "Yeah, that's all." Luckily, Kong Kong and Kiki at the front were more supportive. The two of them were like assembly line workers, working hard to give Nua-Ye more water cannons. But in the end, the father's team still lost the competition. This was because Dejun only had 2 chances to pour water into a large cup. And once again, he fell on grass. Winning or losing was not important. Happiness was the most important thing. But now, Kiki, Nua-Ye, and Xian were all wet. How could Kong Kong and Dejun be spared? Next, the villagers in the village all went up together and played a lively splashing festival. Kiki was having a lot of fun. She did not even want her father to block the water for her. She took a small basin and chased after her 4 friends to splash water. Listening to her happy laughter, it was as if the sun on the horizon was reluctant to leave the mountain. Chapter 1331. Bye-bye. See you later. After the lively splashing activity, Poplar Fruit brought his drenched daughter home. The village chief had said that they had to gather again in 2 hours for the evening's activity. First, he had to give Kiki a bath and change into dry clothes. Although the weather was hot, if she kept jumping around in wet clothes, she would catch a cold or even a fever later. Because it was already nighttime and she had to sleep later, Poplar Fruit changed his daughter into a vest that she usually used as pajamas. It had blue and white stripes and looked very simple and elegant. The shoulder straps were as narrow as 2 ropes tied behind the neck, exposing the little girl's shoulders to the air. It was a very cool little singlet. Not only did it reveal her arms and shoulders, it also revealed the front of her lapel and her back. Chi-Chi's fair and smooth skin was fully exposed. Although the little girl didn't have much flesh on her body, and there wasn't much to look at, this was the first time the little girl's delicate and moist skin, her slender and slim arms, and her exquisite collarbone had appeared in front of the camera. Poplar Fruit changed his daughter into a pair of very loose blue-black pants. Although it was very loose and went past the knees, the little girl's thin and long legs couldn't be covered. Instead, because of the obvious contrast, it made her legs look even more slender and long. It had to be said that other than the fact that the little girl had no breasts, her good figure and exquisite face made many adult female fans both love and hate her. They loved Chi-Chi's naivety and cuteness, but they hated the fact that a little girl who was not even 5 years old could be so beautiful. She could be described as a demon. Was there still a need for an Yuni who was too old to be wanted by anyone? Poplar Fruit also took a simple bath. The summer in Kaiyun was very hot, so he estimated that he would have to take another bath when he came back at night. In terms of clothing, Poplar Fruit would always pick out the best for his daughter. But when it came to himself, he did not care at all. He would dress the way he usually dressed at home, in school, and in the show. Now that he was no longer endorsing Givenchy, his clothes were still the cheap ones that could be bought at Tengu Mall for a few $100s. Of course, Poplar Fruit was a man who looked good in all kinds of clothes. First, he had a good figure, and second, he had a temperament. Others would look like passers-by on the street when they wore designer clothes that cost tens of thousands of yuan. But he looked handsome when he wore clothes that cost hundreds of yuan. After Poplar Fruit came out, he saw his daughter squatting in front of a basket and looking at it. He smiled and said, "What are you looking at?" Of course, he knew what it was. When he came back earlier, the photographer had told him that it was an ingredient for dinner. "Look at pineapple." The little girl happily jumped up from the ground, pulled her father's hand, and giggled. "Papa, there's pineapple here." Poplar Fruit looked at the little girl with a smile. How could he not know his daughter? When Kiki mentioned pineapple, she knew what he meant. She smiled and asked, "I know you want to eat pineapple sweet and sour pork again, right?" "Hee hee, Papa will make pineapple sweet and sour pork for Chi-Chi to eat today, okay?" Yangwu guessed right. The little girl smiled sweetly, pulled her father's hand, and acted coquettishly. Poplar Fruit looked at the basket and saw that there was still pork in it. He smiled and patted his daughter's little head and said, "Okay, if you want to eat, Papa will make it for you." Pineapple sweet and sour pork was a very famous Cantonese dish. The process was not complicated, but the ingredients were very delicate. Fortunately, all of these were stored in Poplar Fruit's mind. As soon as he said it, Poplar Fruit washed the knife and anvil and began to cut the big pineapple. Many people did not know how to deal with this thorny thing, but watching Poplar Fruit deal with the pineapple was like watching an art film. He cut it horizontally and vertically and quickly cut it a few times. The pineapple was like a spinning top in his hand. After the knife light and sword shadow, the pineapple was only a white and fat ball. His cutting method was different from the internet's method of cutting it into several equal parts and then slowly peeling off the skin. Poplar Fruit trusted his cutting skills. The outer skin was almost a thin layer, and the flesh inside was not damaged. Of course, later on, Poplar Fruit still had to cut off the black eyes of the pineapple. After watching her father deal with the pineapple, Kiki could not sit still. She remembered the peacock raised in the first room that the village chief said in the morning. The little girl jumped down from the chair and ran to her father's side. She said, "Papa, I'm going to Brother Nuyi's house to see the peacock." It was still early. Poplar Fruit looked at the bright sky and nodded. He smiled and said to Kiki, "Okay, you have to go with Uncle. Don't run around." Poplar Fruit's house was not too far from Nuyi's house, and there was a responsible photographer following them. Poplar Fruit was not worried. Anyway, he could not make the food in a short time, so he let Kiki play first. Pineapple sweet and sour pork was indeed troublesome. Not only did the pineapple have to be soaked in salt water for 10 minutes after cutting it, but the pork was also troublesome. It had to be cut into pieces, marinated with starch, eggs, and other ingredients, rolled in dry flour before it was put into the pot, and then fried in a pan of oil. The key to making the sweet and sour pork was not just these two. It also had to be made with ketchup, white vinegar, white sugar, and other sauces. Whether the sweet and sour pork was delicious or not depended on the ratio of the sauces. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit often made it for Kiki at home, so he knew how to season it. Poplar Fruit spent a lot of effort and finally made the sweet and sour pork. But Poplar Fruit still wanted to make other dishes. There were potatoes, chicken wings, and other ingredients in the basket. Poplar Fruit planned to cook a plate of sour and spicy shredded potatoes for his daughter. If there was time, Poplar Fruit also wanted to make a barbecue. He saw the barbecue rack just now. However, it was at this moment that Chi-Chi came back. The little girl looked at the fragrant sweet and sour pork on the table, but she was not very happy. The little girl said with pity, "Papa, Brother Nui is so pitiful." How was he pitiful? After listening to his daughter's explanation, Poplar Fruit found out that Nui and Luyi were using soy sauce to go with the rice. Could it be that this scammer's father did not cook for Nui? Poplar Fruit felt that it was a little ridiculous. Actually, there was. Luyi still made a plate of potatoes. The audience saw that as he sang, shredded potatoes, 7 shredded potatoes on a vine, he made a simple plate of fried shredded potatoes. It was oily, and he even added a lot of salt. He even shamelessly said that he could not let Anna know. Otherwise, he would have to cook for them when they got home. Nui was so pitiful. Kiki also felt the same, so she really wanted to help her good friend. Chapter 1332. Big Eyes Met Big Eyes. Poplar Fruit squatted down and looked into his daughter's eyes. For a moment, the father and daughter fell into silence. Poplar Fruit looked at the freshly cooked pineapple sweet and sour pork on the table, and then looked at his daughter. Kiki followed her father's gaze and looked at the fragrant pineapple sweet and sour pork. It looked delicious. Thinking about its sweet and sour taste, the little girl couldn't help but swallow her saliva. "Why don't we share some with Brother Nui?" Chi-Chi hesitated for a moment before she pouted and said reluctantly, "Amen, we can't eat that much either." The last part was true. A whole plate of pineapple sweet and sour pineapple meat was almost filled to the brim with a large plate. No matter how big Poplar Fruit and Kiki's appetites were, they couldn't finish so much pineapple sweet and sour pork. There was also white rice, but Poplar Fruit was still very surprised. Kiki volunteered to share her favorite food with her friends. Although it wasn't the first time, it was still considered a breakthrough. One had to know that pineapple sweet and sour pork was Chi-Chi's favorite food. This reminded Poplar Fruit of Kiki's childhood. This little foodie was very protective of her food. She was only a little over 1 year old, and she even threw a tantrum with a bad Uncle Song Jiwin over her favorite food. Who would have thought that Kiki would grow up and be so sensible? She was willing to share her favorite food with her friends, and it was even her favorite pineapple sweet and sour pork. Poplar Fruit decided to see if his daughter was really willing to share. He asked softly, "Okay, do you want to give it to Brother Nui?" I'm good friends with Brother Nui, so I want to share it with him." Kiki seemed to have made up her mind, and she nodded seriously. Poplar Fruit smiled and continued, "If we give it to Brother Nui, then should we also give it to Brother Kong Kong, Brother Dajuan, and Brother Xian Xian?" He couldn't attend to one thing and lose sight of the other. It wasn't that Yang Guo was trying to be righteous. That was what Yang Guo was thinking. Moreover, he wanted to see if his daughter was really willing to share most of the pineapple sweet and sour meat that she liked to eat. Yeah, Kiki didn't seem to realize the difference between a portion and a majority. The little girl giggled and said, "There's still Brother Kong Kong, Brother Dajuan, and Brother Xian Xian. They're also my good friends." Therefore, Poplar Fruit borrowed a bamboo basket from the owner, washed 4 bowls, and used a spoon to fill each bowl with half a bowl of sweet and sour pork. The first 2 bowls were still okay, but as the bowl went on, the large plate of pineapple sweet and sour pork began to shrink at a speed visible to the naked eye. Half of it was gone, and it continued to shrink. Soon, almost all of it was in the bowl. In the camera, the young lady's beautiful eyes were fixed on the gulu meat on the plate, and her expression slowly became anxious. There was a big difference between sharing a portion and sharing a majority. After sharing a portion, there was still a lot of pineapple sweet and sour pork left. Based on her father's appetite and her own, the remaining pineapple sweet and sour pork wouldn't be enough to fill their teeth. What's wrong? You don't want to share? Poplar Fruit was filling the last bowl. He smiled at his daughter and asked. The little girl pouted and hugged her father's leg. She felt wronged and couldn't bear to look at the pineapple sweet and sour pork that was still shrinking. She stubbornly said, "No." Poplar Fruit smiled. This time, it was really a happy smile. How could he not understand the little girl's thoughts? She didn't mean what she said, but this was the embodiment of her growth. He finished filling the wooden basket and used his chopsticks to pick up a piece of pineapple sweet and sour pork. He gently lifted his daughter's hair and stuffed the piece of pineapple sweet and sour pork into his daughter's mouth. Is it good? Poplar Fruit looked at his daughter and asked with a smile. Because of the delicious food, the little girl's mood rose again. She squinted her eyes and chewed with her mouth full. The sweet and sour taste made her forget her grievances. The little girl nodded vigorously, and her father stuffed another piece of pineapple sweet and sour pork into her mouth. She ate so much that she couldn't stop talking. Go, follow Uncle to deliver it. After you're done, come back and eat with Daddy. Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Don't worry, even if the pineapple sweet and sour pork isn't enough, Daddy will stir-fry shredded potatoes for you and make barbecue for you. Okay. The little girl finally felt relieved. She smiled sweetly and replied. Her long ponytail swung, and she carried the small basket and happily followed the cameraman out. Poplar Fruit stood at the door and watched his daughter's back as she left. Gradually, it was silent in the night before he turned back to prepare the rest of the meal. However, the little girl's delivery of the meal disrupted Poplar Fruit's plan. Originally, after he finished cooking, there would be enough time for the little girl to eat with him. However, when Poplar Fruit finished roasting the chicken leg, it was almost time to gather, but Kiki hadn't come back yet. That was too long. Poplar Fruit asked the director, as she learned through the headset that Kiki had just come out of the last restaurant, Zoshimin's. There was definitely not enough time for dinner. Poplar Fruit thought that he might as well put the 2 dishes and the roasted chicken wings into the rice cooker and let the rice dry. He would eat it when they came back in the evening. The taste would definitely be greatly reduced, but there was no other way. The whole crew couldn't be delayed because of the father and daughter, could they? Poplar Fruit went out to meet his daughter, but saw Zhou Shimin and Xian Xian, who had sent Kiki back. When he asked, he found out that Zhou Shimin and the others hadn't eaten either. Zhou Shimin was also busy. In addition to shooting a sensational clip of an advertiser with Xian Xian, he also worked for a long time to make pineapple steamed rice with pineapple. Naturally, there wasn't enough time to wait for the rice to be cooked. He told the landlord, took his son, sent Kiki home, and called Poplar Fruit to participate in the evening program. Poplar Fruit, you haven't eaten either, right? Zhou Shimin asked with a smile. Yes. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, the dishes are still in the pot. We'll eat them when we come back. Zhou Shimin was interested. He smiled and said, well, let's eat together when we come back. I just steamed pineapple rice. It's sweet. The child will definitely like it. And I also have the landlord's honey wine. Let's taste it tonight. Zhou Shimin said with a smile. Papa, you can't drink. The little girl's ears were very sharp. She immediately pouted and said, Poplar Fruit really didn't want to drink, but since it was a meeting between friends, he had to do something. He touched his daughter's little head and said with a smile, it's okay. Papa won't drink too much. I just want to taste it. He turned to Zhou Shimin and said, this is a good idea. You can cook pineapple rice and wine. I also prepared barbecue and roasted chicken legs. Xian Xian will definitely like it. Of course, there are other dishes too. I want to eat. Little Chu Xian heard and was about to drool. Haha, it's a deal, Zhou Shimin said with a smile. Chapter 1333. Shan Shan came late in the summer night, but by the time Poplar Fruit's 5 fathers and 5 children gathered together, it was already as dark as ink. They could only hear the silence and depth of the forest. There were still lights in the place where they gathered, but they were not very bright. This was not because the production team was stingy, but because if the lights were brightly lit, the effect of the show would be much worse later. Everyone looked in the direction the village chief was pointing. There was a cement platform on the side of the forest, and then a tall frame made of bamboo was built on top of it. It was a bit like the outer frame of a building at a construction site. Of course, this was not for everyone to see the construction site. On top of this frame, there was a long bamboo slanted diagonally. Poplar Fruit's sharp eyes could see the mystery of this thing. How should he put it? This thing was like the big iron rod in the hands of the Awakening Lions team during the Cantonese Spring Festival. The top was thick, and there were huge firecrackers stuffed in it. When ignited, it could make the world tremble. Or, to put it another way, this thing was like a rocket in aerospace engineering, but the engines were turned upside down. There was no need to describe it. No matter how strange it was, it should have its use. This time, producer Xie popped up again. Although producer Xie did not appear on TV many times, he had appeared once for the first time, and now he appeared again. It had already been 5 episodes. However, the children still liked producer Xie very much. This man with the most power in the entire production team did not put on any airs. He usually hid his achievements and fame, but he also talked and laughed with the children in private. Why did he appear now? The fathers and children were all very curious. After the greetings, they got to the main topic. They saw the thin and small producer Xie holding a long bamboo pole with a lit torch in one hand and climbing up the frame like a monkey. The children were all entranced, and their little mouths opened one after another. After they saw producer Xie light the fuse, they jumped down with their heads in their hands and ran far away. The bamboo pole suddenly spewed out thick white smoke, and with a whistling sound, it flew out. Wow! The scene in front of them was as magical as magic in the eyes of the children. These are fireworks. Big Brother Kong Kong said confidently. I've seen them before. They're fireworks for the Spring Festival. This is a bomber. Dejun said, unconvinced. How could something that could spit out so much smoke be so weak? This is called Gaosheng, the village chief explained. The fathers all understood. Didn't fireworks made of bamboo contain the beautiful meaning of rising step by step? It was no wonder that the first Gaosheng had been called out by producer Xie. This was the same reason why producer Xie had personally lit the firecrackers during the first episode of the show. Let's not talk about these feudal superstitions. Next, it was the Fathers' turn to challenge. Under the village chief's instructions, everyone gathered at his ammunition depot to pick their own Gaosheng. Although Poplar Fruit was already the father of a 4-year-old child, his playful heart was not small. Like Hujun, who could even play with a motorcycle, both of them wanted to rush to the big Gaosheng. The bigger the Gaosheng, the higher the risk factor. Looking at the bamboo in her father's hand that was almost as thick as her head, Kiki, who was watching the fun, could not stand it anymore. Papa, don't do this. This is too big. Kiki, who was wearing a small singlet, had jade-like shoulders that twisted with the movement of her small hands. Looking at her nervous little face, one could feel the little girl's deep concern for her father. The children next to her were also as nervous as Kiki. They were happy when they saw producer Xie light the Gaosheng, but the sharp whistling sound was quite scary. Don't be afraid. Your father knows what to do. Poplar Fruit patted his daughter's little head with a smile and said softly, later, you can watch other uncles light it. As long as they light it, I will run back quickly and run to Kiki's side. There will be no danger. Really? Kiki did not cry as easily as she did in the first episode. She increasingly believed in her father's words and ability. Of course, he was the most powerful father in the world. Of course, Poplar Fruit's firm smile gave Kiki a lot of confidence. Okay then, Papa, you have to run faster. The little girl struggled for the last time and did not insist. After choosing, the fathers looked at each other. Poplar Fruit, who was skilled and bold, stepped forward to give the fathers a demonstration. Of course, Poplar Fruit did not take the biggest Gaosheng. Zoshimin also prepared the biggest Gaosheng at the end. Placing the bamboo diagonally on the shelf, Poplar Fruit turned around and prepared to light the match. However, he realized that the little girl had unknowingly run in front of him. Kiki, come over to Uncle. Lu Yi shouted, you can't go there. Your father has a mission and can't take care of you." Poplar Fruit did not light the match. He pulled the curious little girl back to the village chief and asked him to take care of her. It was not that he did not like Lu Yi, but Lu Yi still had to take care of Nu Yi. Poplar Fruit was worried that he could not take care of her. This Gao Sheng did not look at how confident Poplar Fruit sounded. Once it was lit, it would fly into the sky. But with such a long bamboo, if it did not fly, or if it flew randomly, who knew what would happen? Therefore, for his daughter's safety, Poplar Fruit had to be careful. He was still thinking that after lighting the fire, he would quickly run in front of his daughter and use his body to shield her. Over here, a father asked, "If this thing flies out, aren't you afraid of hurting people?" "That's right. Let's just let it fly. This is not the kind that explodes in midair. If it flies out and hits someone in the forest, what will happen?" The village chief smiled and said, "The location of the Gao Sheng has been carefully surveyed by experienced villagers. If they want to release the Gao Sheng, they will give notice in advance. That way, no one will go there." Although that was the case, there was still danger. Furthermore, without any awareness of environmental protection, if such a big bamboo fell from the sky, people would be fine, but animals would suffer. Yangwu didn't think too much about it. Instead, he excitedly climbed up the shelf and lit the fuse with a long, thin bamboo stick from afar. He was still quite calm. He did not throw the bamboo away. After he jumped down, he ran back to his daughter's side without looking back. Before Poplar Fruit could turn around, he heard the sound of gas spewing out. He turned back and saw a thick cloud of smoke. The bamboo, as thick as an arm, had already flown out. "Yeah, it's a success." The little girl heaved a sigh of relief. She happily jumped up from the village chief and into her father's arms to celebrate. Poplar Fruit patted his daughter's back, which was slightly cool and moist. He laughed. It was indeed a little fun. Chapter 1334. Who's next? Lin Yongjian, who was holding the youngest Gao Sheng, stood up bravely. He lit a fire with a bamboo pole and climbed up. Poplar Fruit's fathers each took care of a child while the village chief took care of Dajuan. They all shouted with a smile, "Teacher Lin, you can do it. Light it up. Throw the bamboo pole away. That way, you can run faster," Lu Yi suggested. They were originally nervous, but after experiencing Poplar Fruit's extra-large Gao Sheng, the children's mental endurance had improved. At this moment, the children were laughing and sitting together, cheering for Dajuan's father. Kiki clapped her hands mischievously and shouted like her father, "Teacher Lin, you can do it." Phew! Another sound pierced through the air. Lin Yongjian's Gao Sheng also flew far away. Next was Lu Yi, who also successfully flew up. With 3 consecutive successes, the children and fathers relaxed. Poplar Fruit and company did not ask the children to stay in their arms obediently. Instead, they allowed them to walk around freely. After all, the children were still full of energy and were at an age where they liked to play around. How could they stay still? Kiki was the same. She could not sit still and jumped out her father's arms. She giggled and sat down with her friends around the pillar. With her friends, the young lady felt that she could speak more freely, and it was more interesting. Poor father, abandoned by Kiki. Poplar Fruit smiled and did not interfere. As long as they did not approach the stage and were still within his control, Poplar Fruit was still confident in protecting their safety. Next, it was Ujun's turn. His Gao Sheng was not small and was about the same as Poplar Fruit's. However, Kong Kong was not too happy. His feelings were the same as Kiki's. He was very worried about his father's health. Although Hu Jun was tanned and had a good figure, he was the oldest among the 5 fathers. Kong Kong's mind flashed with a lot of dangerous images when he wanted to climb up the tall shelf and ignite such a thick and sturdy frame. Therefore, the little boy had a little argument with his father. He sat down in the middle of his friends angrily, pursed his lips, and covered his ears with his hands. He couldn't help but raise his eyes to look at his father, but his eyes were filled with complaints and worry. Why do you have to be so stubborn? There are so many things that are easy. Kong Kang's expression was understood by the audience. The children started counting down in unison. It was unknown who had come up with this, but it was as if they were the ones controlling the rocket. The image froze on Kong Kong's face. Suddenly, he stood up in a panic, waved his hand, and shouted, "Stop the countdown! Stop the countdown! What's going on?" "He's not coming down." Dejun, who was laughing heartily at the side, turned his head and laughed foolishly. "He's a coward." Dejun was not a bad child, but sometimes he spoke without thinking. It was always hard to predict when he would say something outrageous. During the first trip, he had gloated over Xian's misfortune, which had caused a lot of controversy on the internet. Kiki, who was sitting next to him, couldn't listen to it anymore. She turned her head and waved her small hand. "Brother Dejun, we can't talk bad about other people behind their backs." After all, it was only a small mistake between the children. Most of the audience didn't take it to heart. What they cared about was what had happened to Hujun. What made Kong Kang's face change color and made Dejun say that he was a coward. It turned out that when Hujun lit the fuse and climbed down to escape, he suddenly found that the fuse had been blown out by the wind. Hujun suddenly fell into a dilemma. It was important to know that whether it was firecrackers or other large explosives, such as the ones used in mining, there was a great risk that the fuse would go out. No one knew if it had really gone out or if it was in a slightly damp state. If it's the latter, it's very likely that it will suddenly reignite at some point, and then it might detonate when you go to investigate. Hujun didn't want to climb back down. He wanted to come down and change to another height. However, just as he was about to climb down, he vaguely heard movement from his son's side. "He's a coward," no matter which child said it. Hujun turned his head and saw his son. His face suddenly darkened, and he felt very uncomfortable. He didn't want his son to lose face because of a small matter, and he didn't want his son's image of father to collapse. So Hujun gritted his teeth and climbed up again. He reignited the fuse that had gone out earlier. At this time, the fuse was very short. He quickly let go of the bamboo in his hand, jumped down, and ran. Just as he ran down the platform, Hujun heard the sound of blowing air and the cheers of his father and children. He couldn't help but look back. This time, the white smoke that was like a flood drowned his head and face. He could have avoided it. Hujun was a little depressed. But what made Hujun happy was that after his triumphant return, his son rushed over and proudly high-fived him to celebrate. The bitterness from before had all disappeared, leaving behind only a calm chuckle. Finally, it was Zhou Shimin's test shot. As an Olympic champion, Zhou Shimin wanted to set an example and challenge the biggest height. This height was bigger than the poplar fruit, and it took him a lot of effort to carry it over. Of course, the height's head was also tied with the most gunpowder. He believed that the scene would be even more spectacular. However, Xian, who had always wanted his father to be invincible and invincible, seemed to have lost his courage this time. Not only did he not dare to release such a big rocket for his father, but he also hid behind a pillar dejectedly after he couldn't out-talk his father. He didn't dare to look. It was too scary. Little Chushuan's mood at the moment was very complicated. He didn't even hear his sister Kiki calling him. Of course, Kiki saw Xian's brother walking with his head down. She blinked and said, "Xian, come sit with your sister." If it was in the past, Xian would have run over, but this time, he acted as if he didn't hear her. The little girl was still very kind. She turned around and followed her brother. She squatted down in front of him and said softly, "Xian, do you feel very scared?" The little boy raised his head and looked at his elder sister, whose face was as gentle as jade. He pouted and nodded. "I was very scared just now, too." The little girl waved her thin arms and moved her smooth shoulders. She said exaggeratedly, "But after my father released it, there was nothing to be afraid of. It will fly away. There is nothing to be afraid of." Chi reached out her hands and placed them under Brother Xuan's armpits. She tried to lift him up, just like how her father usually coaxed her. She said softly, "So don't be afraid. Big sister will protect you. Let's go back and see your daddy, okay?" Xian seemed to gradually regain his confidence and vitality in front of his sister. He was obedient and stood up with the help of his sister. He jumped and was pulled back to the front by his sister. Chapter 1335. The promotion came to an end amidst the cheers of the audience. The fathers all took their children home to rest. Of course, Zhou Shimin took his son home, took the steamed and fragrant pineapple rice and a small bottle of honey wine, and went to Kiki's house in room 3. Take this wine and give it to Kiki's father. Zhou Shimin coughed twice with a smile on his face. He lowered his voice and said, "Maybe he'll be your future father-in-law." What future father-in-law? If Poplar Fruit heard this, he would definitely snort proudly. You want to have ideas about my daughter? Be careful, or I'll chase you to the ends of the earth with a two-handed meow-dow. When she grows up, not even when she grows up, everyone who pursues his daughter is an enemy, an absolutely irreconcilable enemy. Of course, Zhou Shimin was just joking. He took Xian to Poplar Fruit's house. They arrived in a few steps and saw Poplar Fruit washing the pot. Xian is here. Kiki, who was standing on the balcony, saw them and reported to her father like a little scout. "Please sit down." Poplar Fruit smiled and said to Zhou Shimin and his son, "I just poured the dish into the pot and stir-fried it. It tastes better when it's hot." It was mainly steamed in the rice cooker, so it was full of steam. Without oil, the original taste couldn't be found. Roast chicken leg. Xian looked at the fragrant barbecued chicken leg on the table. After stir-frying it again, the barbecued chicken leg regained its crispy exterior and tender interior color. The aroma in the air made little fatty Xian squirm uncontrollably. His chubby little belly shook as if it had a small motor installed. The audience couldn't help but laugh when they saw this. He was indeed a foodie. Look at his sister. She's so well-behaved. You only know how to eat. Zhou Shimin smiled and patted the back of Xuan's head. Just now, Chi-Chi had very diligently helped to move the small plastic stool out. Although the little girl was wearing a cool and cute little vest that exposed her fragrant shoulders and looked delicate, she was not a spoiled little princess. This diligent and neat, warm and hospitable performance made her even more popular with the audience. Zhou Shimin couldn't help but praise him in his heart. As expected of the child of a scholarly family, there's nothing to say about this family's teachings. He had many friends around him. Most of the time, after earning money, they were too busy to discipline their daughters, or they spoiled their daughters too much, causing them to develop princess syndrome. "Come, Chi-Chi, try this pineapple rice made by Uncle." Actually, he could be considered his uncle. Zhou Shimin divided the pineapple rice into 4 bowls. He personally handed 1 bowl to Kiki and then to his son. "Is it good?" Zhou Shimin asked as he watched Kiki taste a small spoonful. "Delicious. It's just a little hot." Sweet and sour, it was easy to whet one's appetite. This was every child's favorite, and Chi-Chi was no exception. Her eyes narrowed into a sweet smile. "Be careful, don't burn it. Eat slowly." Yang smiled as she watched the 2 little ones eat heartily. Xian grabbed a spoon in one hand and a roasted chicken leg in the other. They didn't interfere with each other as they buried their heads in the table and ate. It seemed that he was hungry. It was almost 8 o'clock. How could he not be hungry when he didn't eat at night? Poplar Fruit was hungry, let alone children. Of course, Poplar Fruit and Zhou Shimin were not as busy as the 2 children. The 2 of them leisurely drank some honey wine. Poplar Fruit didn't drink too much. "All right, Brother Zhou." The 2 of them chatted. Poplar Fruit suddenly smiled and said, "I want to discuss something with you." "What's there to discuss?" "Just say it." Zhou Shimin laughed. He drank half a bowl of wine, and his face was a little red. "You should know that the kung fu I learn and the boxing you learn are not the same thing. Of course, there are similarities, but there are also many differences." Poplar Fruit didn't make it very clear. Zhou Shimin didn't understand Poplar Fruit's intentions. He simply followed Poplar Fruit's words. He smiled and said, "I know. According to our tradition, what you learn should be called Chinese martial arts, right? I've seen it before, but you're the best." He gave a thumbs up and smiled. "In terms of kung fu, I can't beat you." Of course, he couldn't beat Poplar Fruit. 10 Zhou Shimins were not necessarily the opponent of 1 Poplar Fruit. Of course, it wasn't that his boxing was bad. After all, Zhou Shimin wasn't the best professional boxer. Poplar Fruit would also weigh the strength of the real boxing champion. But Zhou Shimin was only an Olympic boxing champion. Didn't you see that when he went to professional boxing, the glory he won wasn't worth mentioning? But Poplar Fruit didn't mean to compare himself with Zhou Shimin. It was meaningless. He smiled and said, "Last time on the grassland, when I saw Xian wrestling, I had an idea." Although he was smiling, Poplar Fruit slowly exuded a little momentum. The momentum of a grandmaster. As immovable as a mountain, in the midst of talking and laughing, the boat turned to ashes. At this time, Zhou Shimin didn't pick up the bowl to drink anymore. When talking about his son, he became serious. Poplar Fruit continued, "Later, I went back and thought about it for a few weeks. I think Xian is really good. He is brave, tenacious, passionate, and has a drive to never admit defeat. Very good." He wasn't stingy with his compliments in front of Xian, but the little foodie was still buried in the food. Chi-Chi, on the other hand, was holding a bowl and eating the delicious pineapple rice. She blinked her big bright eyes and listened to her father. Zhou Shimin pushed his son and said with some disappointment, "Don't just eat. It's okay." The child doesn't need to be restrained too much. Poplar Fruit smiled and waved his hand. He said to Zhou Shimin, "I mainly want to discuss with you. If possible, I want to take him as an apprentice and teach him some real kung fu." Poplar Fruit wasn't in a hurry to teach Xian Tai Chi Nigong. This was his treasure, but he had studied martial arts for years. He could teach Xian Xingyi Quan and other kung fu. Of course, when Xian was young, he still focused on the foundation. Some basic qi cultivation methods could also be taught to him. The main thing was that this child was really good at martial arts. Poplar Fruit was a little bit fond of talent. However, in the eyes of the audience, there was an uproar. Was Poplar Fruit's kung fu powerful? It was indeed very powerful. His Tai Chi Nigong was graceful and agile, just like in a movie. However, the audience didn't think so. They didn't care about kung fu. They always liked to gossip about things. When Poplar Fruit proposed this, all kinds of weird ideas came out. Senior sister and junior brother romance, openly accepting a disciple, and secretly recruiting a son-in-law. The director's eyes lit up as he listened from behind. He thought to himself, regardless of what Yanggua's intentions are, this part is definitely going to be a super hype topic. Chapter 1336. After Poplar Fruit made his proposal, he saw Zhou Shimin suddenly fall into silence. Xian also looked left and right in confusion. Finally, he couldn't help but raise his left hand and take a bite of the chicken leg. It seemed that his suggestion was a bit too impactful. He suddenly relaxed and smiled. "Okay, don't be too nervous. I'm not taking a disciple. Let's put it another way. Xian can be my student, but I want to be his physical education teacher." "What's a physical education teacher?" Xian asked in confusion. Kiki giggled and said, "Xian, my papa is going to teach you bim boxing. Then you can be as powerful as my papa in the future. Not only bim boxing, but also other things." Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Zhou Shimin was not nervous. He was surprised by Poplar Fruit's proposal, but he also understood that Poplar Fruit was indeed a person with real kung fu. So, Zhou Shimin smiled and said, "No, Poplar Fruit, I'm in favor of Xian learning kung fu from you. But you should understand my concerns. Xian is too young. It's difficult for me to take him from the government and give him to you." Poplar Fruit laughed, waved his hand, and said, "No, Brother Zhou, you're thinking too much. I'm not letting Xian live in our house. Ahem, that won't work. You know, I've been doing a charity activity called remote teaching before." Poplar Fruit explained, "In fact, learning kung fu is the same. I can teach him remotely through video and network technology." So fashionable? The audience heard it and felt that it was ridiculous. When Poplar Fruit made the proposal just now, the traditional and noble aura around him suddenly collapsed. This made people feel like they had traveled back in time. Just a moment ago, it was still a martial arts movie with music and flute, and now it suddenly returned to a reality show that was not so realistic. But it was also good. The audience would not take the matter of Yanggua accepting a disciple too seriously. But the matter of Poplar Fruit accepting Xian as a disciple was settled. While chatting with Poplar Fruit, Zhou Shimin completely sold out his son. Xian was still focused on eating and did not know what the adults were talking about. The more Chi listened, the more confused she became. She lost interest as well. When Xian was full, she stood up and played with Xian's brother. Xian did not have any ideas. He was Sister Kiki's follower. He followed behind her and happily listened to her instructions. The two of them seemed to have found a new toy. The two little ones surrounded a camera next to them. This camera was not the kind that the cameraman carried on his shoulder. It was propped up on the ground. In order to let the two curious children see it, the cameraman deliberately lowered the stand. So, Kiki and Xian pestered the cameraman uncle and asked him to teach them how to use this big guy. Fortunately, there were 4 cameramen in charge of the scene, so it did not affect the work of the program. The director also looked at it in amusement. He directed 2 cameramen to film Kiki and Xian. He thought that something interesting would happen. "Look, they're filming us," Poplar Fruit said to Zhou Shimin with a smile. Zhou Shimin's back was facing the camera. Zhou Shimin heard and turned around. He smiled and changed his position. Like Poplar Fruit, he was either facing the camera from the side or the front. He said, "Hey, are you two filming a movie?" "Yes, we are filming a movie," Xian said in a baby voice. "Are you directors or actors?" Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. After filming so many episodes, the children actually knew what a director was. For example, producer Xie and the director's sister, although they did not know the scope of their duties in detail, they had a vague idea. Of course, the village chief, Li Rue, had to be mentioned. Sadly, the children did not think of him as a host. The image of the village chief was too deeply rooted in their hearts. The little girl who played theater was more interested in being a director this time. The little girl looked at the camera's frame and said seriously, "We are directors." "Yes, we are directors." The director's little lackey, Xian, agreed. Poplar Fruit clapped his hands and said with a smile, "Then what do you want us to do?" "What do you want us to do?" Xian looked at Kiki for help. Not sure if it was because she had heard too many stories from her fathers, the little girl stood in front of the camera excitedly and told the 2 fathers the plot without hesitation. "Papa, you said, today I made a delicious drumstick." The little girl waved her small arms and moved her palms in front of Poplar Fruit and Zhou Shimin. Then Xuan's papa said, "Wow, it's delicious, I want to eat it." Papa said, "Well then, you perform a magic spell, and I'll give it to you." Xuan's papa said, "But I don't know magic." Papa said, "Then I'll teach you." The plot was a little erratic, and could even be said to be a little unreasonable, but the little girl's serious look was really funny. So, under Kiki's command, the fathers began to act. Of course, they still needed the cameraman's help to control the camera, and the little girl stared at the frame. What was Xian doing? He didn't know anything, so he smiled foolishly and watched his sister's performance. Kiki's sister was really beautiful. She was wearing a vest, and she looked very charming when she was serious. "Then I'll teach you." Poplar Fruit held back his laughter and continued to act with Zhou Shimin. "Really? You're so nice. Can I shake hand with you?" Zhou Shimin exaggeratedly put on a touched expression. "Wait, Xuan's papa, you have to give me your hand." Kiki was very careful. She didn't want Zhou Shimin to do anything. Zhou Shimin held back his laughter and stretched out his right hand. Poplar Fruit also reached out his hand to shake Zhou Shimin's. With Zhou Shimin's experience, Poplar Fruit also began to move. In front of his daughter, Poplar Fruit, who was not a good actor, put down his nervousness and shyness in front of the camera and acted naturally. "Watch my magic." Poplar Fruit exaggeratedly waved his hands in the air and then pushed out like a turtle wave qigong. "Ouch!" Following Kiki's script, Zhou Shimin stood up, bent over, hugged his stomach, and stepped back. "My stomach hurts. I need to go to the toilet." Seeing this, the audience, who were already laughing happily, burst into laughter again. Kiki's script was too ridiculous. It wasn't over yet. Under Kiki's urging, Zhou Shimin really did run to the toilet, while Poplar Fruit stood up with his hands on his hips and laughed proudly. Did you see how good I am?" It was a very funny performance. It was originally a child's logic, but under the interpretation of two adults and the guidance of a cute girl, it became a very interesting performance. It became the last highlight of the show. Of course, it was getting late. After the program team sent the mission card for tomorrow morning's episode, Zhou Shimin took Xianxian home to rest. Chapter 1337. Brother Nui. Early in the morning, a sweet-sounding cry that was like the sunlight cutting through the mist seemed to have traveled through time and space. Everyone turned their heads to look and saw a cute little girl that looked like an oriole stomping on the stone pavement, running over with a smile. Why did she look like an oriole? Kiki was wearing a bright yellow striped pantskirt. Of course, there were many other colors, but the bright yellow was more eye-catching and made her look more lively. The pantskirt was more like an extended t-shirt. The hem was loose and comfortable, and the length was just enough to cover the little girl's shorts. On her slender calves, she wore long socks that covered half of her calves, making her look even more cute. Just now, Nono-e was still a little angry with his father because he was unhappy, but Chi-Chi's appearance instantly made the atmosphere cheerful. Nono-e no longer pouted, but a surprised and happy smile appeared on his face. In terms of clothing, among the 5 children, Kong Kong only wore the same few clothes. Dejun and Nui also didn't have any special outfits. Nui didn't with a retro style often. The ones who changed the most frequently were Kiki and Xianxian. Xianxian's clothing had improved a lot in the past few episodes. It wasn't like the beginning, when she had to wear aviator sunglasses and golden vest when she woke up. Kiki wasn't as ostentatious as Xianxian, but she changed her clothes almost every time. This was thanks to the pile of clothes bought by Zheng Yujie and the clothes bought by Fong Beibei. It wasn't extravagant, but every set of clothes on Chi-Chi's body would shine with dazzling elegance. Therefore, it wasn't impossible to dress Chi-Chi up as a little princess of 100 forms. Everyone gathered at the breakfast place. The enthusiastic Dione had already prepared a big pot of hot soup. White vermicelli was thrown in, scooped out, and juices were poured over. A thick aroma wafted over. It was Kaiyun's most famous dish, cross-the-bridge rice noodles. I ate it with Papa before. When the little girl thought of the fragrant cross-the-bridge rice noodles, her mouth watered. However, it wasn't that easy to eat breakfast. The fathers were very experienced, so they didn't appear to be very agitated. They all cautiously held their children's hands and stared straight at the village chief, waiting to see what tricks he was going to play. On the lawn between the village chief and his father, there were 2 large carpets. On the table, there were 3 things that were needed to eat the crossing the bridge vermicelli. Bowl, chopsticks, and vermicelli. How do you play this game? He had to lie on the ground, lift his leg, flip over, pick up the item, and flip it back. That would be considered a success. Was it simple? It was definitely not simple. Ujun couldn't help but ridicule the village chief. Even though the village chief's belly was too fat and his demonstration failed, he still shamelessly announced the rules of the game amidst the sarcasm of his fathers. This time, instead of each dad taking turns to challenge one item, each of the 5 dads would challenge one item. As long as 3 dads could successfully pick up the 3 items, they would be able to enjoy the delicious crossbridge vermicelli. If they didn't succeed, they wouldn't be able to eat breakfast. That wasn't the case. The program team's initial game was just to torment the dads. Later on, they would still eat whatever was available. They wouldn't stop you from eating breakfast if you didn't pass the game. This was good, but it was also bad. What the dads complained about the most was that since the game had no meaning, why did they still carry on? They knew the reason, so they had no choice but to follow the program team. They treated every game segment as if it was real and tried their best to challenge it. The dads discussed together and decided that Lin Yongjian and Lu Yi would challenge the bowl segment, Poplar Fruit would challenge the chopstick segment, and Hu Jun and Zhou Shimin would challenge the vermicelli segment. The 2 most difficult segments had the reliable Poplar Fruit and Zhou Shimin holding down the fort. The dads believed that there wouldn't be any problems this time. When the challenge began, it didn't matter how Lin Yongjian performed. Instead, it was the kids who were shouting around the carpet. It made the originally comical atmosphere somewhat joyful. Come on, come on. Kiki was even more engrossed. She had already taken off her little shoes and ran onto the carpet in her socks. However, Lin Yongjian ultimately failed the challenge. He swung around, but his feet were unable to fall over. It was a comedy that made the audience laugh. When it was Lu Ye's turn, he did a good job. He flipped over in an instant, but the target was a little difficult to find because he couldn't see it. It was his son who helped him a lot. He ran over and placed the bowl that was tilted far away at his father's feet. He saw Lu Yi step on it with one foot, causing the bowl to tilt up. Then, he used his other foot to clamp it and lifted it up shakily. Poplar Fruit and the others were worried for Lu Yi. They were afraid that he wouldn't be able to clamp it up and the bowl would fall and hit his head. Luckily, Lu Yi completed the task in the end. It was Poplar Fruit's turn to take the stage. The program team and audience, who were full of malicious intentions to see Poplar Fruit make a fool of himself, were disappointed. Poplar Fruit showed an unparalleled advantage in terms of body control. He easily flipped over with his waist and abdomen strength. The only thing that was a little tricky was using his feet to find the chopsticks. Luckily, although it took a little time, Poplar Fruit still found them. The chopsticks were too thin, so he couldn't use Lu Ye's method. They saw Poplar Fruit's feet were extremely nimble. With his left foot and right foot, he used his thumb and index finger to clamp down on the chopsticks. With a bit of strength from his waist and abdomen, he flipped over. Me too, the dads cheered. Poplar Fruit was also very playful. It was as if he had gone through a lot of difficulties to succeed in the challenge. He clenched his fist and growled. That was not all. They could see Poplar Fruit suddenly kneel and slide on the ground like a football field. He slid to the front of his daughter, who was sitting on the carpet, and lifted the giggling girl up. This celebration was too exaggerated. The audience could not laugh anymore. Using a trendy phrase on the internet, it was, "You city people really know how to have fun." Of course, it was still too early to be happy. There was still the last fan bundle that had not been successfully challenged. First, Jun tried. Jun said something shocking. "Brother Jun, your daddy is going to die from being bent." He and Brother Jun were kneeling by the side watching. It was fine if his words were shocking, but Jun was like a jinx. Jun really did not succeed in the challenge. He did manage to clamp down on the fan bundle, but he did not manage to flip it back. His legs kicked in the air, and his body slid a circle. In the end, he could only give up. Luckily, the dads still had Zhou Shimin, the strong Olympic champion, to support them. Zhou Shimin finally completed the last challenge. He could finally eat the smooth and refreshing cross-bridge rice noodles. Kiki's eyes were smiling. She pulled her father and ran over impatiently. "Yes, don't add spicy." Chapter 1338. After breakfast, the children and the fathers were all ready to go on an adventure in the jungle. After the village chief invited a wild elephant expert to guide Scare, the fathers and the children, he suddenly announced a request. Not everyone was required to track wild elephants in the jungle. 2 fathers were required to take the helicopter to patrol in the air, while the remaining 3 fathers were divided into 2 groups to take care of the children. Which 2 dads wanted to go? Suddenly, the fathers and the children were silent. Xian and Jun couldn't hide their panic. They held their father's hands or closed tightly, and their faces looked as if they were about to cry. They whispered that they didn't want their father to leave. Kiki hugged her father even more tightly. She didn't panic and even had a smile on her face. However, Poplar Fruit could feel the strength of his daughter's hug and the trembling of her little hands. When the village chief asked her, the little girl shook her head violently. She pulled open her father's clothes and buried her head in it. "I don't want to leave Papa either." Poplar Fruit smiled bitterly and suggested to the village chief, "How about we don't take the helicopter and go on an adventure together?" This proposal was echoed by all the fathers. But in the end, it was still rejected by the village chief. If they all went together, there would be no novelty. The program group just liked to mess around and deliberately create some tears and conflicts. They didn't want to leave, and Kong Kong didn't want to either. He was also like a boneless boy. He was softly held by Jun's big hands, and lay in his father's arms. The little boy didn't say a word and stayed like that for a long time. But after all, he was a big brother. Kong Kong, who was at least 1 year older than everyone else, secretly glanced at the nervous and panicked younger siblings. He pouted and finally sighed. "What should we do?" he asked. "What should we do?" Kong Kong asked. "What should we do?" Kong Kong asked. "What should I do?" Hu Jun asked. "What should I do if I want you to take the helicopter?" When Kong Kong said this against his will, tears were about to fall, so he buried his face in his father's arms. He didn't want others to see his weakness. "Then what should you do? What should I do if I want to accompany you?" Hu Jun was extremely surprised. Ignoring the surprised expressions of the other fathers, he had mixed feelings at the moment. He really didn't want to leave his son, especially on such a dangerous adventure. On one hand, he wanted to protect his son. On the other hand, he didn't want to lose the opportunity to explore with his son. Last time, at the Mountain of Flames, Hu Jun didn't have the chance to climb with his son. He felt very upset. Was he going to experience the same helplessness and regret again today? Kong Kong was very sensible. He stood up, turned around, and said, "This one is too young. He will accompany him. If he wants to accompany her, then you can only go with him." The other, he was referring to Lu Yi. The few fathers and the village chief looked at Kong Kong, touched. He was really too sensible. The expression on the young man's face was a little complicated. Although he had made this decision and Hu Jun was going to take the helicopter, a sense of loss slowly rose in his heart. There was also a father. Who would take the helicopter? Who would have thought that he would suddenly say, "I'm not afraid." The little boy was not trying to show off, nor was he like Kong Kong, who was willing to do anything to take care of his younger siblings. His shout came from the bottom of his heart. Lu Yi was dumbfounded. His son was the third oldest among the children, about the same age as Dejun, but he had always been silent. He wanted to keep a low profile and protect himself. He didn't want to leave his son. However, who would have expected his son to have such a reaction? "I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid." He used this as a slogan. The young boy's naive look was really funny and heart-wrenching. Heart-wrenching for his father. "I wish for my father to leave." He repeatedly announced Lu Ye's departure. "Because I like to be in the helicopter by myself. There's also you and Big Brother Dejun." Yi's childish words made everyone laugh. "You don't want to take the helicopter." A few fathers quickly corrected him. "Then what am I doing?" He finally understood. The other dads all burst into laughter. Under their laughter, Yi lowered his head in vexation. Of course, it wasn't because he wanted his father to leave. Up until now, he still didn't care about this. Although there was a heart-wrenching scene of Kong Kong crying before she left, and there was also a scene of Lu Yi not knowing whether to laugh or cry as he forced the heartless Yi to cry along with him. But in the end, it was decided that Hu Jun and Lu Yi, this pair of brothers in distress, would take the helicopter. Among the remaining fathers and children, Zhou Shimin would lead Xian Xian and Yi in one group. Poplar Fruit and Lin Yongjian would lead Kiki, Dejun, and Kong Kong in another group. They would split into two small groups to follow the directions on the map to track the elephants. Kong Kong whispered one last thing to his father. "If there's any danger and the elephants are far away, take the helicopter to pick us up." He still treated his father as his last hope. Hu Jun stretched out his hand to wipe away the tears on his son's face and said, "Of course. If there's any danger, your father will come and pick you up. Do you understand? I believe in this." This promise wasn't reliable because Hu Jun wasn't the omnipotent Superman in the movies. However, he still said it to reassure Kong Kong. "Brother Jun, don't worry. Leave Kong Kong to me. I'll protect him." Poplar Fruit smiled and patted Kong Kong's shoulder as he said to Hu Jun. The two fathers who were taking the helicopter still had to return to the stronghold. As for Poplar Fruit and the others, they were going to set off for real with their children. After saying goodbye to each other, the group headed into the forest. In Poplar Fruit and Lin Yongjin's group, there were 2 adults with 3 children. On the other hand, Poplar Fruit and Lin Yongjin still had to carry a compass and a simple map in their hands to walk. Therefore, it was difficult to take care of them all. Therefore, after a discussion, Poplar Fruit and Lin Yongjian decided that Lin Yongjian would lead the way while Poplar Fruit stuffed the map and compass into his bag. No, the compass was later taken away by the excited little girl. He needed to free up one hand to hold his daughter's hand and the other hand to hold Kong Kong's hand. Since he had promised Kong Kong's father that he would take good care of Kong Kong, Poplar Fruit was very attentive. The primitive forest was more difficult to walk through than the mountainous roads in Xiong Village. Moreover, the soil was slippery and the bushes were overgrown. If they weren't careful, they could easily slip and fall. Kong Kong was fine. He walked very carefully. As he walked, he could talk energetically. However, Kiki's feet slipped a few times. Poplar Fruit grabbed his daughter's hand and didn't let her fall. This made Poplar Fruit even more cautious. Chapter 1339. Walla Walla. In the tropical jungle, it was either uphill or downhill. There were only a few sections of flat land. Not to mention the slippery soil, there were also bushes and entangled roots. Taking care of children was not an easy task. What's more, Poplar Fruit was a big man of 188 meters. In order to take care of the two little guys, he had to bend down all the time. Even Poplar Fruit was exhausted. What's that sound? Is it an elephant? Kiki asked curiously. The little girl was not afraid at all, but her question made Kong Kong's little face tense in an instant. There's a river in front. Lin Yongjian, who was leading the way, said. Only then did Yang Guo raise his head to take a look. He laughed. How is this a river? It was clearly a stream that just reached their ankles. It turned out that the sound that made Kong Kong nervous just now was the sound of the stream passing through the jagged rocks. Although it was very shallow, Poplar Fruit and Lin Yongjian did not want the children to take risks. After all, the stream was still a little turbulent. Moreover, they did not know if there was moss on the rocks below, so it was easy to slip. Therefore, Poplar Fruit and Lin Yongjian took the children over. Poplar Fruit walked twice. He took Kong Kong first and then came back to pick up Kiki. When he carried his daughter over, the little girl was very concerned about her father. She said to her father in a soft voice, Papa, your shoes are dirty. There was no other way. There was no bridge by the stream. According to Lin Yongjian's guidance, they had to go this way. Stepping on the stream, Yangguo's sneakers were soaked. The socks inside were stuck to her feet. This feeling was very uncomfortable. Later on, when she stepped on a mountain road, there would be a lot of mud. But this was something that couldn't be helped. It doesn't matter. You can go back and wash it later. Poplar Fruit comforted his daughter. Walking on a mountain road, Kiki, Kong Kong, and Dejun were chatting. With the protection of adults, they did not feel very afraid. Brother Kong Kong, let me tell you, I've seen an elephant before. Its trunk can roll up a big tree. Dejun was indeed experienced and knowledgeable. Elephants are very dangerous. We have to be careful. Kong Kong said loudly. I've never seen an elephant. Kiki said. The little girl was a little anxious. She went up and took Brother Dajun's hand and said, But I have seen pandas. I adopted a panda with Papa in Sichuan province. It's called Pang Pang. The topic was a little off topic, but the little girl's magical experience made her friends a little dumbfounded. Kiki, have you ever seen an elephant? Poplar Fruit laughed and said, Daddy used to take you to the zoo to see an elephant. Have you forgotten? An elephant has 2 long teeth. The little girl tilted her head and thought for a moment. Then her eyes lit up. Oh. She nodded vigorously and said, That's right. I've seen an elephant. After walking for a while, the road ahead gradually became difficult to walk on, and it was impossible to pass. Above his head, there was a riveted iron bridge, but there was no road leading to it. Teacher Lin, wait a minute. After crossing the stream, Poplar Fruit had been puzzled. This time, he finally couldn't help but shout and said, It seems that we're going the wrong way. Wrong way? Lin Yongjian stopped, picked up the map and compass, and looked at it again. He actually didn't understand, and after walking for a long time, he also lost their own position. Frowning, Lin Yongjian looked for a while, then pointed to the road on the right and said, Let's go this way. With that, He took Dajuan's hand and walked over there, and Kong Kong followed. Only Kiki stayed by her father's side obediently. Wait a minute, Teacher Lin. You're going the wrong way. Poplar Fruit anxiously shouted again. Can you let me see the map first? That's right. We should go this way. Lin Yongjian stopped, but he firmly believed in his choice. He waved his hand and said, Poplar Fruit, it's okay. You take the child and follow me. There's no mistake. Sometimes, this was Lin Yongjian's weakness. He was impatient and a little blindly confident. Perhaps he felt that he was older than Poplar Fruit by more than a generation, so he could be considered an elder. The older, the wiser, so he should have more experience and knowledge than Poplar Fruit. However, Poplar Fruit didn't intend to go along with his temper. Just now, when he glanced at Lin Yongjian's compass and compared it with a map in his memory, he knew that Lin Yongjian was going the wrong way. He took out the map from his backpack and asked his daughter for a compass. Poplar Fruit walked to Lin Yongjian's side and said, Teacher Lin, I know how you feel. You want to take us out of here as soon as possible. This is very kind of you, but listen to my analysis, okay? It won't take more than a few minutes. Poplar Fruit's words were easier for Lin Yongjian to accept. He nodded and didn't argue with Poplar Fruit. He looked at the map in Poplar Fruit's hand and listened to him. We just set off from here, but I looked at the compass. We should have been going southeast, in this direction. Poplar Fruit gestured with his hand and said, It's also possible that we deviated a little, so should be going the wrong way. The correct direction should be south, slightly west. The little girl was very curious. She pulled her father's arm and stood on tiptoe to take a look. However, Poplar Fruit didn't buy it. He wanted to explain it to Lin Yongjian. Poplar Fruit patted his daughter's little head and said, Don't make a fuss. Dad will show you later. They were indeed going the wrong way. Because the stream they had just crossed didn't exist on the map, the correct path should be across a bridge, not the one they were on now. So if we want to go back in the correct direction, we should be going this way. Poplar Fruit gestured and said, But there is no road in this direction. Let's go this way first, then see if there's a small path that we can turn around. Okay then. Lin Yongjian had his shortcomings and strengths. He was able to accept his mistakes and correct them. He nodded and said, Let's do as you say. I will hold the map, and Brother Kong Kong will hold the compass. The little girl said excitedly. This time, it was Poplar Fruit's turn to hold Kiki and Kong Kong's hands and walk in front, while Lin Yongjian and Ajun brought up the rear. Poplar Fruit wasn't 100% sure whether it was right or not. After all, the map given by the program team was too simple, and Poplar Fruit could only judge based on the general direction. He hoped that they could find the road they were going to take, or that they could see the iconic bridge. Otherwise, Poplar Fruit would be slapped in the face. However, it seemed that they met a fellow villager in front of them. Poplar Fruit looked up and saw a person dressed as a local villager in a black linen coat walking in the forest far away. He was delighted, thinking that this couldn't have been arranged by the program team, right? Great, I can ask for directions. Chapter 1340. The two chapters 1393 and 1394 in the morning were only published with a few hundred words due to a system issue. Xiaohan has already contacted the editor, and the editor said that it will be corrected as soon as possible, so please wait patiently. I also apologize to the friends who subscribed and found the problem. Is this an extra hired by the program team? Poplar Fruit guessed. However, if it was set as an NPC, how did he escape so quickly? Hey, wait, uncle, brother, wait a minute. Poplar Fruit shouted without thinking too much. The man in front of them stopped helplessly. Looking at the short jacket and leggings, Poplar Fruit could tell that he was someone who often walked in the mountains. Looking at the strange expression on the man's face, Poplar Fruit thought that they had scared him. He smiled and explained to the mountain man, then said, Brother, you often walk in the mountains. Can you help me see if the bridge leads in this direction? The reason why he called him brother was because he was not very old. He looked to be in his 30s, thin and weak, but very agile. His knuckles were thick, and he walked in the mountains with a wooden stick in his hand. There was also a strong smell of tobacco on him. The mountain man's eyes flickered. He looked at Poplar Fruit and then at the cameramen surrounding them. He swallowed and said in a hoarse voice, "Yes, it's in this direction. Walk another kilometer and you'll see it." "Oh, thank you so much. You have no idea how many rounds we walked in the mountains just now." Thank you, thank you." Lin Yongjian wiped the sweat from his forehead and smiled. After receiving instructions from his fellow countrymen, Poplar Fruit felt more confident. He saw the mountain man look at his map again with a serious expression. He did not pay much attention to it and reached out to shake the man's hand. He smiled and said, "Brother, thank you." For some reason, Poplar Fruit felt that the man was intentionally or unintentionally looking at him and his daughter a few more times. Perhaps it was an illusion. After bidding farewell to the villager, Poplar Fruit and Lin Yongjian continued on their journey with the three children. They didn't know how far they had walked, but after crossing the iconic bridge, they walked for another half an hour. However, they were still far from their destination. Just as they were about to stop and rest, they suddenly heard the sound of a helicopter. Raising his head through the thin branches, he could see a helicopter flying in the sky above his head. The helicopter must have seen them, so it hovered in the sky. "Helicopter, we're here." The children waved their hands and shouted. The adults knew that the voices above were so loud that they definitely couldn't hear the shouts below. But the children didn't know that. They shouted with all their might until their faces turned red. "Dad, I'm here." Kong Kong was so excited that he shouted the loudest. Kiki was beside her. She had been shouting along with Brother Kong Kong just now, and it had almost become a habit. She also shouted, "Papa, I'm here." "No, your dad knows that you're here." Poplar Fruit didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he rubbed his daughter's little head. He smiled and said, "Isn't your dad here too?" The little girl was stunned for a moment before she realized how ridiculous her shouting was. She shyly stuck out her little tongue and giggled. "I made a reservation with my dad." Kong Kong patted his chest and said proudly, "If we're in danger, they'll come down to pick us up. Should I call them down?" "That's amazing, but we're not in danger right now. So let's keep going." Poplar Fruit smiled and reached out his hand to Kong Kong. The helicopter only stopped for a moment before it turned around and flew away. Kong Kong looked at the sky with regret and sighed. He let Kiki's father hold his hand and walked forward gloomily. In his heart, he still hoped that his father could be by his side. The helicopter had brought Kong Kong unlimited excitement, but after that, it was as if he had lost his passion for fighting, and Kong Kong's mood became much gloomier. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit and the others still had Kiki, the little happy fruit, to ask some questions that made everyone laugh from time to time. There was also Dejun, who had an encyclopedic memory, but his thoughts were somewhat stray. Along the way, they were still laughing nonstop. "Why don't we see an elephant?" Kiki was slightly out of breath. Although her physical strength was better than her peers, she was still a girl. The little girl asked curiously, "I want to see an elephant." Sometimes, speak of the devil and he will appear. Just as Kiki's voice fell, a huliulu sound came from the side. Suddenly, the father, the children, and the entire filming team suddenly stopped moving forward. Was that really an elephant? "It's the sound of an elephant," Poplar Fruit said resolutely. His ears were more sensitive and he could hear it clearly. Moreover, this sound was not difficult to determine. Lin Yongjin grabbed Jun's hand tightly. He was dumbfounded and at a loss. At that moment, he was also a little flustered. Just now, he spoke as if he was watching an animal show fearlessly, but now that he was about to encounter it, he could only feel a chill seeping in and did not know what to do. Kong Kong was even more flustered. His father was not by his side. He took a deep breath and hurriedly retreated to Poplar Fruit's side. He said nervously, "What should we do? We need to call for help as soon as possible." However, did he think that he was filming a movie, saying that a helicopter would fly down from the sky and pick them up just because he said that he wanted to call for help? This was a fantasy story. Yangwa also frowned. He didn't panic. He didn't know if it was because he was skilled and daring. But he also looked at the people from the program crew beside him. He wanted to see if they could continue moving forward or if they should just retreat. The only one who was not flustered or afraid was Kiki. After the little girl heard the sound of an elephant, she was still in a daze. However, when she heard her father say, "It's an elephant," her mind quickly sketched out the appearance of an elephant. No, it should be said that it was the appearance of a cute elephant with a strong anime style. "Aya, the elephant is here. Can we see the elephant? I really want to be good friends with the elephant." The little girl was actually full of joy. She wanted to walk forward, but her father's hand in her hand kept her in place. Kiki looked back at her father in confusion and asked in a daze, "Papa, why don't we go see the elephant?" "We can't go. The elephant is very dangerous." Poplar Fruit looked at his daughter speechlessly. She had an eager expression, just like in the past. No matter what kind of animal, whether she knew it or not, whether she was familiar with it or not, she was very interested in seeing it. This was not the first time Poplar Fruit had seen such a situation, but this time he could not let his daughter do whatever she wanted. Not to mention whether these wild elephants would be a threat to the children, and not to mention whether Poplar Fruit could get rid of such a huge and heavy elephant with his martial arts. Today, he was entrusted by Hu Jun to protect Kong Kong, so Poplar Fruit could not take the child to take the risk. Chapter 1341. Didn't he say that he was going to look for an elephant? Why didn't he show it to her? Chi-Chi looked at her father in puzzlement, her little mouth pouting. Her heart was filled with anticipation just now. However, before Poplar Fruit could explain to Kiki, there was a commotion from behind. It turned out that the sound of a helicopter came from the sky again. Kong Kong remembered his father's words. "If there's danger, Daddy will come and pick you up." Believe that. Yes, Kong Kong believed it. Moreover, the helicopter had appeared so coincidentally. He couldn't wait to shout for help. "We're here." Lin Yongjian had also forgotten that he was an adult. When he saw the helicopter, it was as if he had seen a life-saving straw. He shouted loudly with Kong Kong. Wasn't this stupid? Poplar Fruit turned around and anxiously held Kong Kong's hand. He said, "Kong Kong, don't shout. If you shout so loudly, the elephant will hear you." If they encountered these big guys in the wild, it would be too late to avoid them. What if they attracted the elephant by shouting and shouting? However, Kong Kong didn't believe what Poplar Fruit said. His mind was only filled with what his father had said. He shook off Uncle Poplar Fruit's hand and shouted wildly, trying to guide the helicopter to land. Slow down the helicopter to the slowest speed. Land, land. Kong Kong's voice was hoarse from all the shouting. Lin Yongjian also believed it. He pointed to the sky and said, "They're coming. I see them. They're coming right away." "Teacher Lin," Poplar Fruit said helplessly, "the helicopter can't fly over. If they fly over, where will they land? Moreover, they can't see the situation here at all. Stop shouting. I want to see the elephant." Kiki pouted and shook her father's hand. Her face was full of unhappiness. Her emotions were placed in a different style in this scene. Everyone was still trying to avoid her, but she was determined to pounce in that direction. Poplar Fruit was helpless. This time, both sides were arguing, and there was no way he could take care of both sides. He ignored Kiki for now and held her hand tightly. He said seriously to Lin Yongjian and Kong Kong, "Teacher Lin, Kong Kong, do you still remember what that Annie said before? An elephant is a docile animal. It won't attack us." Poplar Fruit said, "But if we attack it, or in other words, we shout so loudly that it scares the elephant and makes it think that we are attacking it, then it will lose its temper and attack us. So, let's not talk loudly and stay calm, okay?" Poplar Fruit's words didn't have much effect on Kong Kong, but it calmed Lin Yongjian down. After all, he was an adult. At this time, the elephant expert who had just gone to investigate ran back and said in a hurried voice, "Hurry up, go, 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 follow me." It seemed that it really wasn't safe. In fact, the audience had a clear view of the situation and felt that there was no great danger. In fact, the production team had only driven the fathers and children away from the danger zone to prevent accidents from happening. But at this moment, hearing the expert's nervous voice, the fathers all panicked. No matter what, they had to run first. They couldn't stay in the same place and encounter danger. Lin Yongjian and Jun left first, but Lin Yongjian was too flustered. He slipped and pulled his son down a small slope. Fortunately, the slope was not high. They stopped after sliding for half a meter. They were not injured. "Slow down," Poplar Fruit reminded softly. "Watch your feet." He held his daughter with one hand and took care of Kong Kong, who was on the verge of breaking down. Kong Kong was still shouting, "Uncle Pilot Land! Kong Kong!" At this time, Poplar Fruit's tone also became stern. He bent down and looked into Kong Kang's eyes. "You can't keep shouting like this, because if you shout like this, the elephant will be afraid and attack us. It will even chase after us. Do you understand?" Kong Kong only shut his mouth because of Poplar Fruit's sternness, but the little boy was already at a loss, and the expression in his eyes was extremely flustered. Just now, Kiki was still acting coquettishly and wanted to see the elephant. However, in the current chaotic situation and the influence of Brother Kong Kang's emotions, the little girl also became nervous. She grabbed her father's clothes tightly, her eyes wide open, and said with a choked voice, "Papa, I'm scared." "Don't be afraid. Papa is here." Poplar Fruit patted his daughter's shoulder with heartache. No, the elephant expert in front was running too fast. Lin Yongjian couldn't run with his son, so he could only reach out and carry to June. He turned around and called out to Poplar Fruit. "Poplar Fruit, hurry up and catch up. Can you take care of him?" "It's okay, I can do it. Leave Kong Kong to me. Teacher Lin, quickly lead the way. I'll catch up right away." Poplar Fruit also learned from Lin Yongjian. However, he carried Kiki and Kong Kong in his left hand and right hand respectively. In fact, it was very easy. Or rather, it was even easier than him bending down to take care of the two. Poplar Fruit took a step forward and steadily stepped over the small tree root in front of him. He strode forward and chased forward. Perhaps because there was a hug to rely on, Kong Kang's emotions stabilized a little. He pursed his lips and looked at the sky from time to time, trying to get news from the sound of the helicopter that was still spinning in the sky that his father was coming to save him. But there was no news. Because of the panic just now, Kiki was quite frightened. She sobbed, hugged her father's neck, and said with a choked voice, "I'm so scared. I'm so scared. I want to go home." "Don't be afraid. Papa is protecting you, right?" Although Poplar Fruit was rushing, he still said to his daughter with ease, Okay, don't cry. Papa's clothes are wet because of you." The little girl's emotions calmed down a little because of her father's calm voice. She sobbed and asked, But why do we have to run?" "Because the elephant is coming," Poplar Fruit said. Kiki stopped sobbing immediately. She blinked her big watery eyes in confusion and asked in confusion, "Why do we have to run when the elephant is coming?" It turned out that her fear, just now, was because she was frightened by the adults and Big Brother Kong Kang's panic behavior. In the little girl's heart, elephants could still be good friends. She was even thinking of going to see an elephant just now. Ignoring Kiki's doubts for the time being, Poplar Fruit and the rest finally escaped the dangerous area under the lead of the elephant expert. Without the rough cries of the elephant behind them, their footsteps finally had some confidence. Of course, the elephant expert did not ask them to retreat, but went around an S-shaped route, maintaining a 45-degree angle from the elephant as they moved forward. Moreover, he knew the way, and very quickly, he brought the fathers to the front of the second bridge marked on the map. Huff huff. Lin Yongjian did not have the stamina of Poplar Fruit. He carried his son and ran for a while, and even fell twice. When there was no danger, he put June down and panted heavily. He felt like he had just survived a disaster. Chapter 1342. Thanks to Editor Tiger and the programmers behind the scenes for their hard work. The missing content of 1393 and 1394 has been restored. Everyone could take a look. If it hasn't been restored, please delete the books from the bookshelf first, and then add them later. There should be no problem. Sorry for the trouble. It's okay. Poplar Fruit also put his daughter and Kong Kong down together. He was physically fit, so he carried the two children down the mountain, up the slope, and across streams and rivers. After all this trouble, his face didn't change, and he was only slightly panting. "Papa, where's the elephant?" The little girl was still there, reluctantly pulling her father's lapel and looking back. Perhaps it was too far away. Not to mention the elephant's shadow. Even the elephant's cry just now had long been far away. The elephant? We've already gotten rid of the elephant. Don't be afraid, Poplar Fruit said with a smile. The last "don't be afraid" was said to Kong Kong. Kiki was not afraid. Looking at her regretful face, one could tell. However, compared to Kiki, Kong Kong, who was the oldest, was not in a good mood. He pursed his lips and kept rubbing his eyes. Finally, the long simmering emotions broke out. Kong Kong suddenly turned around and stood alone in a corner, crying. He didn't want others to see him crying in a sorry state. However, Poplar Fruit couldn't ignore him. He hurried over and comforted him softly. In fact, Kong Kong's crying was not entirely because of fear. Fear was the fuse. This was the sadness of a person's belief collapsing. He firmly believed in the agreement with his father, but in the end, his father still didn't fly the plane down to pick him up. It was like Xixia Fairy fantasizing that one day there would be a peerless hero wearing golden armor and stepping on colorful auspicious clouds to marry her. However, even when she was sent to the bridal chamber by the Bull Demon King, there was still not a single cloud in the sky. Where did the last bit of trust between people go? Kong Kong was crying very sadly. Chi-Chi couldn't help but poke her head out to take a look. She was also drenched in sweat, and the sweat on her face had washed away the tear stains from earlier. On the other hand, her naughty hair had become all kinds of pretty shapes because of the sweat. Kong Kong, don't be afraid. Uncle promises you that we won't be in danger again. Is that okay? Poplar Fruit felt a little guilty. Although it wasn't his fault, Hu Jun had entrusted Kong Kong to him. Kong Kong, crying so sadly, was his responsibility. Brother Kong Kong, don't be afraid. De Jun also came over. He tried to comfort Kong Kong and said, "Let me tell you, elephants are not scary at all." The beginning of De Jun's words were quite good. Kiki nodded vigorously as she listened. But towards the end, it gradually became his reminiscent show. I used to see an elephant in the zoo. His teeth were very long and could pick up a tiger. This seems to be doing more harm than good. Isn't this describing the elephant as more and more terrifying? Fortunately, Kong Kong was still a strong child. After crying for a while, she gradually stopped crying under the comfort of Poplar Fruit and Lin Yongjian. Let's continue walking. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, Kong Kong, you hold your sister's hand. He was responsible for taking 2 more photos with the camera. He had been taking care of the child, getting lost, and encountering danger, so he had forgotten about the camera around his neck. Just now, when Kong Kong was wiping her tears, the director specially reminded the 2 fathers who had the camera. The camera was quite interesting. It looked like a SLR, but in fact, it was a Polaroid camera. Poplar Fruit stood behind his daughter and snapped a photo of Kong Kong and Kiki holding hands as they walked in front. There wasn't a big difference in height between the little boy and the little girl. One was wearing colder clothes, while the other was wearing warmer clothes. Kiki was wearing a mosquito-repellent light gauze jacket. It was light yellow and looked very nice. Looking from behind, their backs were extremely beautiful. Hearing the sound, the little girl turned around curiously. She grabbed her father's hand and snatched the photo from him. She imitated her father and swung the photo that hadn't been fully formed yet. Finally, the figure in the photo was clear. Brother Kong Kong, look. Kiki giggled and shared the photo with Brother Kong Kong. Let's take a few more photos. Poplar Fruit discussed with Lin Yongjian. The scenery here is still pretty good. The scenery had always been very beautiful. This was an almost primitive tropical rainforest. Every mountain, every river, every flower, and every tree had their own unique charm. It was just that Poplar Fruit and the others didn't have time to look at it in detail. Finally, along the way, Poplar Fruit and Lin Yongjian took many photos of the 3 children. There were solo photos, group photos in pairs, father and son, and father and daughter photos. Come, the 3 of you stand together. I'll take a group photo for all of you. Poplar Fruit was addicted to taking photos. He smiled and directed them. Unknowingly, they had walked for more than 2 hours. They were almost at the campsite. It was time to take a group photo to commemorate this not an easy journey. At this time, the three children were in high spirits. Even Kong Kong didn't cry like before. Perhaps it was because they had experienced hardships together, but Kong Kong seemed to be more affectionate with her younger brother and sister. Kiki stood on the right, Dejun on the left, and Kong Kong in the middle. He put his hands on Dejun and Kiki's shoulders. The three children smiled sweetly. The sweat on their faces couldn't hide their relaxed and joyful expressions. Perhaps this was the most moving smile. Poplar Fruit specially took 2 more photos. This way, each child would have a photo to keep as a memento. Just as Poplar Fruit was handing out the photos to the 3 children for them to play with, behind them, at a bend in the mountain road that Poplar Fruit didn't notice, a voice suddenly called out, "Kong." Everyone looked back in surprise. Kong Kong turned around and ran over excitedly. He didn't shout like the other children, but he was very excited. He ran over in a few steps and hugged Hu Jun's thigh. Hu Jun and Lu Yi had also returned. They couldn't wait at the campsite and came out to welcome them. Of course, Lu Yi was still a little disappointed and anxious because Zhou Shimin and his son, as well as his new Yi, had not returned yet. I'm so touched. Kiki was still playing with the photos in her hand. Her left hand was holding a small stack of photos, but her eyes were staring straight at brother Kong Kong and her father. She let out a sigh like an adult. "What are you touched about?" Poplar Fruit laughed out loud. He rubbed his daughter's little head. He was very interested in her unintentional cuteness. "I don't know. I feel very touched." The little girl giggled. She was full of energy, or rather, the children were full of energy. Unlike Lin Yongjian, who had returned to the campsite, she quickly put down her school bag and found a small stool to sit on to catch her breath. The little girl ran around. Sometimes she would run to see brother Kong Kong and her father complaining, "Why didn't you come to fetch me?" Sometimes, when she heard that Zhou Shimin and Xian Xian had returned, she would run over to see the commotion. She really couldn't stop running for a while. "Look," she ran back to her father and the little secretary to talk about the fresh stories she heard from Uncle Zhou Shimin. Chapter 1343. From Kiki's words, Poplar Fruit roughly understood what had happened to Zhou Shimin. Compared to Poplar Fruit's twists and turns, Zhou Shimin's side was much calmer. They did not get lost, and even though they encountered an elephant, they did not panic like Poplar Fruit because they were at a certain height. Of course, it was not a smooth journey. After all, Zhou Shimin had to take care of 2 children. Nuoyi's leg was injured and his face was hit by the camera hanging around his neck. What was even more amazing was the photo in Kiki's hands. The little girl excitedly squeezed into her father's embrace and looked at it with him. Chuan Chuan's papa said that when they saw it, the snake was not afraid. In the photo, a colorful python was coiled around a tree branch more than a meter above the ground. It was so lazy that it did not move. Not to mention that it was a python as thick as an arm and could easily kill an adult sheep. Even if it was a normal, small, colorful snake, most girls would be afraid. However, not only was Kiki not afraid, she was even looking at it with great interest. It was as if the python could become her good friend like gold. All right, Poplar Fruit was really helpless against his daughter's passionate thoughts. He laughed and talked about all sorts of things. Finally, he managed to dispel Kiki's thoughts of dragging him to see the snake. The program team gave the father some time to rest, as well as some time for Lu Yi and Hu Jun to talk to their sons. However, the rest time passed very quickly, and a new segment of the game was about to begin. The village chief brought a bamboo plate and placed it on a wooden stake. Inside the plate, there was a conical cover made of green leaves. Poplar Fruit looked at the familiar green leaf cover and could not help but tremble. Were they going to eat worms again? Also, the village chief was holding an exquisite wooden hammer. What was he going to do? Auction? Such a word appeared in Poplar Fruit's mind. Sure enough, the village chief told everyone the rules of the game. It was very simple. It was an auction. However, everyone's money was not used. It was useless. The village chief took it away. The village chief had prepared 5 large bags of daddy coins in large express envelopes. Everyone had 500 yuan in them. This will be all the money you will need to participate in the next auction. Kiki happily ran over to take the money from the village chief. As she walked, she lowered her head and counted the money. She did not hear what the village chief said. In fact, all children were like this. After going through the sales segment of the second trip, they began to understand the use of money. Therefore, each one of them was more of a money grubber than the other. Poplar Fruit saw Kong Kong grinning from ear to ear. Normally, this cold little soul would not be so happy. The auction game was very unpredictable. Even a number of auction items, the village chief kept his mouth shut. Poplar Fruit felt that the most interesting thing should be the 5 children. Children were different from adults. Adults were more rational. Even if they encountered something they liked, they would more or less measure their purchasing ability. They would even weigh the value of the item to see if there was a need to spend a lot of capital to buy it. However, children would not think too much. In their hearts, there were only 2 choices, yes or no. When the village chief opened the lid of the first auction item, fortunately, it was no longer those disgusting worms. On the tray was a large cup of green drink. According to the village chief's introduction, it was green melon juice. It was even chilled in the fridge. It was cool. One look, and one could tell that it was the best medicine to relieve the heat in this stuffy summer. Once they saw the green melon juice, Dajuan, Xian, and Nua Yi's eyes lit up. Of course, Kiki was not included. The little girl felt that fruit juice was better. It would be best if it was red watermelon juice. The green one did not look very appetizing. In the first auction, there was a love-hate situation. Dajuan, Xian, and Nua Yi took turns to bid. The only bad thing was that Lin Yongjian cared too much about winning or losing. He kept going back on his words and changed the bid of Dajuan, who did not learn well. In the end, the green melon juice landed in the hands of the little foodie Xian. Seeing that the price had been raised and the value of the green melon juice was not that high, Lu Yi and Lin Yongjian both stopped bidding. However, once the second auction item appeared, it immediately caused an uproar. The village chief was too evil. How could he bring out ice cream? That was ice cream. The program team must have felt that ice cream had played a big role in Min Province and Grape Groove. All the children could not help but go crazy for it. Otherwise, why would they bring it out to bid? Suddenly, the 5 children expressed their strong desire to their father. I want ice cream. Kiki was the same. The little girl was already holding her father's hand and stomping her feet. She pouted her little mouth and looked at her father pitifully. Papa, I want it. I want it. Can you help me buy it? Poplar Fruit waved his hand and smiled, saying, I've already given you the money. What do you want? Bid for yourself, okay? Poplar Fruit had a clear view of the situation. He calmly jumped out of the auction situation and saw the program team's intention for this auction. There was nothing that he needed to be nervous about. He might as well let his daughter train for a bit. It was fine to make a mistake. It was even better if she made a mistake. Kiki would have a deeper impression of it, and she could take fewer detours in the future. Although that was what he said, Kiki was a little hesitant to bid herself. She knew numbers and knew how to count. She would not make the mistake of bidding randomly like Dejun. However, she could not control others from bidding randomly. She had only hesitated for a moment when Dejun, Xian, Nua Yi, and Kong Kong had already messed up the market. The current price had already shot up to $200. The little girl panicked. She turned to her father for help. Poplar Fruit looked at her with a smile, but did not say anything. Let her choose for herself. That was Poplar Fruit's attitude. All right. The little girl turned around and saw that Nua had already bid $270. The little girl was stunned. The price was increasing faster and faster. Kiki's mind was in a daze. She mustered up her courage and shouted, $400! $400? The fathers were all taken aback. This was too shocking. One had to know that the previous bids were at most $10 or $20. Even $50 was the highest bid. In the end, Kiki had increased it by $130. Kiki, $400. Are you sure it's $400? The village chief asked as he looked at Poplar Fruit. Actually, Dejun had also increased the price crazily, but he was eventually suppressed by his father. Kiki is bidding randomly. Poplar fruit, are you going to do something about it? Chapter 1344. With Lin Yongjian as a precedent, and with Lu Yi and other fathers interfering from time to time, the village chief looked at poplar fruit and felt that he would give his opinion. Then, Kiki's bid of 400 yuan would be cancelled. A formal auction did not allow for regrets. Wasn't this child's play? But wasn't the program just to coax children? As long as they did not win the bid, even if they regretted once or twice, everyone would just laugh it off. However, poplar fruit was not an ordinary father. He smiled and pointed at Kiki. Then, he spread his hands, indicating that he had left everything to Kiki. Even if she were to cause trouble, there was nothing he could do about it. All right, your family sure knows how to have fun. The village chief began shouting, 400 yuan going once, 400 yuan going twice. If no one offers a higher bid, the ice cream will go to Kiki. This way, Kiki, you can also share the ice cream with your father. It's mine, it's mine. The young lady leaned into her father's embrace and hugged a bag of money. She played with her fingers and looked at the 2 cups of ice cream blissfully. It was as if it was already in her pocket. That's right, Chi-Chi was only thinking about ice cream right now. She still hadn't realized that after spending so much money, she wouldn't have enough money to compete with her brothers no matter what other better items were auctioned later on. The young lady watched as the village chief's hammer was about to fall. That way, she would be able to get the ice cream back. However, another variable occurred. Kong Kong suddenly stood up and raised her hand, shouting, 410 yuan. Kiki was stunned. The duck that was in her mouth seemed to have flown away. The young lady's eyes turned red. However, she held back her tears and did not let them fall. She turned her head to look at her father. Whenever she encountered a problem, she would always rely on her father to give her ideas. Her father, who was resourceful, would definitely be able to help her get the ice cream back. On the other side, the bidding began again. Kong Kong bid 410 yuan, Xian Xian bid 420 yuan, Nua Yi bid 430 yuan. This commotion caused by Kiki and the craze caused by Kiki seemed to have involved all the children. Dad, what's bigger than 430? Dejun asked. Fortunately, Dejun didn't know how to count. Otherwise, Lin Yongjian would have collapsed. He laughed and said, forget it, I don't want it. 430 is high enough. To fool his son, Dejun didn't care too much about the ice cream. But Kiki was conflicted. She only saw a smile in her father's eyes. Her father did not say a word. He just crossed his arms in front of his chest, looking like he was not involved in this matter. The little girl pursed her lips and stomped her little feet on the ground. She was so anxious that she was about to cry. Poplar fruit could only come up and gently pat the little fellow's head. Her hair was soft, and with a bit of water vapor, it felt even darker. He gently said, just do as you wish. Is that so? At first, Kiki was still a little confused and conflicted. At this moment, Kong Kong raised her bid again. 440. This ice cream was probably the most expensive ice cream in history, right? But with so many children bidding, didn't they see the fathers shaking their heads with wry smiles? 440. The village chief shouted twice and felt that no one was going to continue bidding. He raised his small hammer and was about to close the deal. But at this moment, Kiki suddenly raised the envelope in her hand and shouted crisply, 500 yuan. The little girl's eyes were still red, and her little face looked like a pear blossom in the rain. She was delicate, and weak, making one feel pity for her. But when she shouted that price, she didn't look weak at all. Instead, her tone gave people a feeling of firmness. 500 yuan. No one offered a higher price than Chi-Chi, and no one offered a higher price. This was because everyone only had 500 yuan in their hands. Only Kiki had bet all her money for the ice cream. The fathers were all shocked. The village chief was also shocked. But the ice cream was finally in Kiki's hands. When she didn't get it, she was still nervous and would throw a tantrum from time to time. But now that it was finally hers, Kiki's face bloomed with a charming smile again. The little girl was very excited. She took 2 cups of ice cream from the village chief's hands and immediately ran to her father's side. She raised it up high as if she was presenting a treasure. Her pair of big watery eyes blinked. Poplar Fruit knew what his daughter meant. He smiled, walked around the ice cream, and gently patted his daughter's little head. Go and share with your friends. Dad doesn't need to eat ice cream. As he said that, he glanced at Xian Xian. Xian Xian really wanted to eat ice cream just now, but because he had participated in the bidding for the cucumber juice, he didn't have any more money to compete for the ice cream. In the end, he could only watch his sister Kiki took the ice cream away. Xian Xian couldn't help but hug his father and cry. In the end, he still had the temper of a child. Xian Xian cried. No matter what his father said, he didn't have any intention of stopping, until someone patted his back and a familiar voice came from behind. Xian Xian, I'll share this ice cream with you guys. The crying suddenly stopped. Xian Xian turned his head with tears on his face. He was surprised to see Sister Kiki putting a cup of ice cream in his hand. Kiki was very satisfied to see the change in Xian Xian. She smiled happily and ran back to her father's side, shaking her ponytail without waiting for Xian Xian to thank her. The cup of Kiki that was given out was shared with her friends. The remaining cup of ice cream was hers. The little girl was very happy. She was thinking about the ice cream. After eating 2 spoonfuls, she felt that the ice cream was cool and refreshing. Her body was cold, and the hot feeling was swept away. Kiki comfortably let out a nasal sound. She raised her head and saw Brother Kong Kong looking at her from not far away. To be precise, he was looking at the ice cream in her hand and licking his lips. Because the little boy was shy, he didn't ask Xian Xian, Dajuan, or Nua E for the ice cream. He just stood there. In reality, Kong Kong's desire to eat ice cream was no less than anyone else's. One had to know that during the bidding, other than Kiki, Kong Kong was the one who paid the most money. Kiki was stunned. She was also a little embarrassed. She walked over and scooped up a small spoonful of ice cream. She handed it to Brother Kong Kong and said softly, I'll share it with you. In fact, Kiki was still a little resentful towards Brother Kong Kong. After all, if it wasn't for Brother Kong Kong who kept raising the price, she could have won the bid for the ice cream with only 400 yuan. However, Kiki wasn't the kind of person who liked to hold grudges. She took the ice cream in her hand and instantly forgot about the resentment in her heart. Kong Kong looked at the ice cream that Kiki handed over. Her wrist was very white, and Kong Kong suddenly thought of Big White from the Supermarines. Kong Kong came back to her senses and reached out to take the small spoon and ice cream from Kiki's hand. Kiki was confused for a moment and realized that something was wrong. She only wanted to share a spoonful with Brother Kong Kong. Why did he take it all? Just as the little girl was about to explode, Kong Kong brought the small spoonful of ice cream that Kiki had scooped up to her mouth. Kiki ate it in a daze. Then she saw Kong Kong turn the small spoon around and use the other side to scoop a spoonful of ice cream. She then turned the spoon around and fed it to her sister. This scene had also happened in the Great Valley before. However, because of the editing by the production team, the audience could only see Kong Kong's performance in this episode. Instantly, many of the female audience members were half melted. This was quite good, wasn't it? Chapter 1345. The ice cream was not finished yet, so the auction continued. Of course, to Kiki, who had spent all her money, the remaining items had nothing to do with her. But when the third item appeared, it was still the same as the ice cream, causing a stir among the 5 children. This time, the auction items were roasted chicken wings and drumsticks, as well as 2 bottles of Cuckoo Star beverages. Poplar Fruit smiled. He saw Xian Xian crazily shaking the meat, as if he wanted to take it for himself. As for Dejun, Nua E, and Kong Kong, it was about the same. Kiki looked at the roasted chicken wings and drumsticks. The little girl pursed her lips. She knew she had no hope. The little girl turned around to look at her father, then turned around and buried her head in her father's embrace. Her depressed and regretful feelings were self-evident. It's fine. You've already eaten the ice cream. Dad will make more for you when we get back. You can eat as much as you want. Poplar Fruit ruffled his daughter's hair and smiled. The popularity of the third auction item wasn't bad at all. Although, without Chi-Chi's bid, everyone didn't behave so crazily. But slowly, the price rose to more than 300 yuan. 400 yuan. Jun shouted. Was he going to raise it to 500 yuan again? In this auction, from the moment Kiki started fighting for the ice cream, the bubble had already been created. If just looking at Kiki's ice cream, not to mention 400 yuan, even 500 yuan for the roasted chicken wings and drumsticks would be worth it. But one had to know that the first item, the cucumber juice, was only sold for 70 yuan. But obviously, without Kiki's disruption, the remaining fathers were more cautious and did not continue to raise the price. They felt that rather than spending all their money here, it would be better to keep it. There were more items to be auctioned later. At that time, no one would have the ability to compete with them. Lu Yi, who had not spent any money yet, had such thoughts. Thus, the third auction was decided. Thus, Xian began to wail over his roasted chicken drumsticks. Luckily, Big Brother Jun gave him the chicken wings. Xian's sad little heart was comforted. Jun ate the barbecued chicken drumstick himself, while QQ Star Beverage was given to Nua, E, and Kiki. Kong didn't want it. Before the fourth auction item came out, Kiki was already lazily curled up in her father's arms like a kitten. If it weren't for the fact that they were still filming, the little girl would have wanted her father to hold her in his arms and curl her head into his neck. If you're sad, please comfort me. If he spent all his money at once, the rest of the game wouldn't be fun anymore. However, the fourth auction item was met with a cold reception. That was because it was not something delicious, but a set of toiletries. Or rather, it could be said that it was the ticket to a comfortable hot bath in the jungle camp. But no one wanted it. Louis even laughed. I wouldn't want it even if you gave it to me. Each of them was more shrewd than the other. They all wanted to save their money and leave it for later. Daddy. The little girl suddenly reached out and tugged at her father's clothes. She raised her little head and her eyes sparkled. She asked expectantly, if no one buys it, can you give it to us in the end? You want it? Poplar Fruit laughed in surprise. Yes. I want to take a bath. It's sticky and uncomfortable. The little girl tugged at her collar and pouted. She seemed to be very hot. Indeed, her face was still covered in sweat. That won't do. Poplar Fruit said with a smile, if you didn't pay, then there won't be any. You can't have the thought of getting something for nothing, right? Kiki pursed her lips in dissatisfaction and did not say anything else. It seemed that this auction item was going to be unsold. But at this moment, Kong suddenly raised his hand and said, 30 yuan. It looked like he was very supportive. He did not have any intention of buying it at all. Jun looked at his son in confusion and thought, what's the point of buying this? However, Old was not a father who liked to interfere with his child's decision. He smiled and did not say anything. Kong made a bid, but no one else competed with him. So this auction item was successfully sold. The village chief was still a little amused. He felt that it was strange that this auction item was sold for such a low price. He did not see that if it wasn't for Kong, it would have been unsold. Kong ran to get the toiletries back. However, he did not return to Jun's side. Instead, he walked past Jun and came to Kiki. The little boy's expression was tense. He stretched out his hand nervously and trembled. He looked at Kiki and said, this is for you. Kong must have heard the conversation between Kiki and her father. Otherwise, why would he bid for the auction item that Kiki wanted and give it to Kiki? Wow. Poplar Fruit laughed in surprise. Kiki, look. You shared the ice cream with Brother Kong just now. Now, Brother Kong bought you some toiletries to repay you. Isn't that right, Kong? Kong looked nervously at Poplar Fruit and nodded. The few fathers smiled knowingly at this scene. Of course, there was still some surprise in their eyes. However, they did not think too much about it. After all, even Kong was still a child. It was not as complicated as an adult's relationship. Thank you, Brother Kong. Kiki was a little embarrassed. However, she still took the items and smiled sweetly. After saying that, she shrank into her father's arms and was unwilling to come out. Poplar Fruit was very satisfied. He felt that Kiki could at least learn two things from the auction. One was that when auctioning something you like, putting all your eggs in one basket might not be the best choice. The other was that if you give someone a rose, the hand will have a lingering fragrance. If you share it with others, sometimes there will be unexpected gains. Poplar Fruit directly explained these principles to Kiki. She might not understand, but through her own experience and Poplar Fruit chat with her in a few days, the learning effect would definitely be better. It was not just two principles. Poplar Fruit was pleasantly surprised to find that the village chief had given Kiki a chance to experience a third principle. All right, our auction this time is officially over. The village chief did not take out a fifth auction item. He smiled and said those words in a very annoying manner. It's over? Everyone was dumbfounded, especially Lu Yi. He was the one who lost the most. He did not spend a single cent of the 500 yuan he had. This is life. It was really a drama. The few fathers who had spent a lot of money laughed out loud. They patted Lu Yi's shoulder mercilessly. It was not to comfort him, but to mock him. Lu Yi wanted to cry, but had no tears. He looked bitterly at the village chief and thought to himself, "Are you playing with me? What did Dream of the Red Chamber say?" The mechanism was too clever. This principle was obvious. Wasn't it just a replica of throwing away a watermelon to pick up a sesame seed? Chapter 1346. 5 people, only 4 items, not even enough people to share. Although everyone hated the village chief, the auction was still over. Fortunately, after that, everyone had a pretty good dinner. It was said to be an elephant meal, but it was more like a fruit feast. It was all vegetarian fruits, but they were arranged very delicately, like a coconut tree made of mango slices and a flower bed made of red cherry tomatoes. This was definitely the work of a master. Of course, the children didn't have an eye for art. They wouldn't be reluctant to eat just because it looked good. Look at Xian. He directly tore down the tree, picked up a dried mango, dipped it in yogurt, and stuffed it into his mouth. "It's so delicious," the little foodie shouted as he ate. Zhou Shimin smiled snappily and said, "I know you like to eat. Hurry up and eat. Otherwise, the ants will help you eat later." "I like to eat fruit." Kiki also kept eating, but she said to her father with some regret, "But if only there was a roasted chicken leg." The little girl was definitely a carnivore. She was still thinking about the roasted chicken leg that she didn't get just now. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "Okay, don't think about it anymore. Tomorrow, no, the day after tomorrow, when we get home, Dad will roast it for you." After saying this, Poplar Fruit's heart inexplicably tightened again. He frowned and remained calm. This feeling had been with him since he got on the plane to Cayenne province. It was sometimes strong and sometimes weak and sometimes disappeared. And Poplar Fruit hadn't found any danger until now. No, if there was danger, perhaps it was the encounter with the elephant just now. But in fact, it wasn't dangerous at all. They didn't have close contact with the elephant. Perhaps it was because they were in such a primitive forest. Wild animals such as elephants were actually dangerous. However, Poplar Fruit was still confident that he could protect Kiki. What elephant, tiger, what was that? Poplar Fruit could knock down a tiger with his bare hands. If the 2 long Miao Dao at home could be brought, Poplar Fruit felt that it wouldn't be a problem to kill an elephant. All right, I don't need to care about this 6th sense that works sometimes. Because now, the village chief began to announce the choices that the 5 fathers had to make. They wanted to stay in this camp tonight. This request was not beyond the fathers' expectations. The village chief did not need to use any high-sounding reason to stay here to observe the elephants. However, the choice between the tent and the treehouse made the fathers feel conflicted. There were 2 tents and 3 treehouses, which meant that 2 families had to stay on the ground and live in the tents they had just discovered. The other 3 families could live in the safer treehouses. Why weren't tents safe? Because behind the camp was the river where elephants often roamed. Who knew if elephants would appear in the middle of the night? In the animal world, they often came to the river to drink water at night. The more the village head said this, the more the fathers felt a chill down their spines. They felt as if an elephant was about to step on them. Why were the choices today so difficult? One moment, they were exploring, taking a plane, and the next moment, they were living in tents and dancing with elephants. They always had to bring the children to dangerous places. Of course, it wasn't necessarily dangerous because the program team had invited a team of real experts to help them track wild elephants. Moreover, the camp was protected by safety facilities. I'll do it. Xian and I will stay in the tent. Zhou Shimin looked at the other four fathers and raised his hand. He felt that he should take responsibility. After all, he was always called an Olympic champion. Most importantly, Zhou Shimin felt that Hu Jun and Lu Yi had sacrificed enough in the previous exploration, so they shouldn't be asked to stay in the tent tonight. Popperfruit thought so too. However, he still had to ask for his daughter's opinion. Kiki, let's sleep in the tent tonight, okay? No. Why don't we stay in the treehouse? I want to stay in the treehouse. Kiki waved her small hand. Her eyes were filled with yearning for the treehouse. After all, the treehouse at Grape Gully wasn't a real one. It was just Kiki's imagination. Popperfruit secretly complained about the program team. They must have done it on purpose. They heard that Kiki liked the treehouse the last time, so they deliberately did it this time. If it wasn't for the treehouse, Popperfruit was very confident that he could persuade Kiki. However, the treehouse was too attractive to Kiki. Look, when we were searching for elephants in the forest, you didn't want your father to leave you. So Hu Jun and Uncle Lu Yi want to take a plane. This time, shouldn't we be more generous and let Hu Jun and Uncle Lu Yi stay in the treehouse while we stay in the tent? Popperfruit still tried to persuade his daughter. But Kiki was still a little reluctant. She looked at her father with a conflicted expression and was unable to nod her head. Popperfruit was having a headache when Lin Yongjian suddenly patted Popperfruit's shoulder and said, Popperfruit, Dajuan and I will stay in the tent? Popperfruit was stunned and hesitated for a moment before asking, Can you do that? What are you saying? What do you mean we can't do that? Lin Yongjian raised his head and laughed as though Popperfruit didn't believe him. Hence, it was decided that Lin Yongjian, Dajuan, Zhou Shimin, and Xian would stay in the tent on the ground. The other three pairs of father and son or father and daughter would stay in the treehouse on the tree. There's one more thing, the village chief finally said. It turned out that in order to protect the safety of the camp, Zhou Shimin and Lin Yongjian, who were staying in the tent, had to take turns keeping watch. If they discovered any movement from the elephants, they had to immediately wake everyone up and evacuate. The danger was another matter. After all, no one had experienced it before. Lin Yongjian and Zhou Shimin were happily discussing who would keep watch for the first half of the night and who would keep watch for the second half of the night. It's all right. After 3 o'clock, I'll help you keep watch, Popperfruit said with a smile. He wasn't joking. After all, he had already woken up at 3 o'clock. He got up to help keep watch and let Lin Yongjian and Zhou Shimin, who had worked hard all day, sleep. This was what he should do. With that settled, Popperfruit held Kiki's hand and followed Hu Jun, Lu Yi, and the others to find their own house. Zhou Shimin and Lin Yongjian also needed to pack their luggage and prepare to stay in the tent. The treehouse also required them to go around a small fence path and then climb the stairs. Actually, it couldn't be considered a real treehouse because it was built with an iron frame leaning against the trees. It was a long and narrow platform that looked like a still house in the forest. There were indeed a few wooden houses on it. Of course, there were more than 3 of them. Popperfruit didn't care. After all, the program crew liked to torment people like this. It was better to take a look at his own room. Chapter 1347. They were a little tired from playing that day. Although the children played around in the treehouse for a while, they eventually returned to their rooms to rest early. Kiki did the same. The little girl took a comfortable hot bath and went into the small treehouse. Under her father's care, she fell asleep quietly as her father told her a story. However, Popperfruit did not stay with her all the time. At around 3 o'clock in the morning, Popperfruit crawled out of the mosquito net. He carefully covered the mosquito net to prevent the bad mosquitoes from stinging the little girl. Only then did he put on his shirt. He was going to help with the night watch. He walked to the door and looked around the room. Although the room was immersed in darkness, Poplar Fruit could still see the little girl sleeping soundly. He was a little worried, so he closed the door and locked it. He did not lock it completely, but this might make him feel a little more at ease. Walking down and back to the tent camp, Poplar Fruit did not see Zhou Shimin or Lin Yongjian. There was only a staff member of the program team, sitting on a small bench in the middle, dozing off. Sure enough, they just wanted to mess around a little. In the end, they did not make things too difficult for these celebrity fathers. Poplar Fruit felt that he had figured out the sinister intentions of the program team. He smiled slightly and went up to pat the staff member on the shoulder. The staff member suddenly woke up. He looked up and said shyly, "Teacher Yang, why are you here?" In the past, only a few female editors called Poplar Fruit Teacher Yang because they were young. However, some time ago, Poplar Fruit was promoted to the head of a new department in Higashiyama University and became the interpreter for the military parade. After the news spread, Poplar Fruit's academic status was consolidated. Therefore, most of the staff in the program team followed and called Poplar Fruit Teacher Yang. Compared to Lin Yongjian's teacher Lin, this wasn't considered a compliment. It was more of a form of respect. They felt that Poplar Fruit was too amazing. Words like extremely talented and extremely knowledgeable were simply created for him. Poplar Fruit smiled and said to him, "You go to sleep. I'll guard here. Anyway, I've slept enough." Thus, Poplar Fruit was the only one left to keep watch. Poplar Fruit took a deep breath of the fresh air in the forest. Although the night had passed and the concentration of carbon dioxide had increased, the freshness of the air was still much better than in the city. In such a place, Poplar Fruit felt much more relaxed physically and mentally. Poplar Fruit wasn't idle either. He was bored anyway, and sitting around was even more boring. He might as well practice some boxing to train his body. Because of the existence of the camera, Poplar Fruit didn't practice his own Tai Chi. Instead, he practiced Xingyi-Iquan, Bajiquan, Wing Chun, and various other boxing techniques that he learned from the internet. He was also a bit mischievous. He didn't follow the routine. One moment, he practiced Xingyi-Iquan, and the next moment, he switched to Wing Chun moves. Only he had a thorough understanding of Kung Fu. If it were someone else, they definitely wouldn't be able to switch so freely. Although it was training, Poplar Fruit's ears were pricked up. Not to mention the camp. Even if it was 100 meters away in Kiki's small treehouse, he could hear everything clearly. Although he didn't really care about the warning of his sixth sense, Poplar Fruit still wanted to be careful. When it was almost 5 o'clock in the morning, Poplar Fruit had already finished the warm-up stage. A little sweat began to appear on his forehead. But suddenly, he heard a rustling sound. It was still far away, about a few hundred meters away, but Poplar Fruit could hear it the fastest. He stopped his movements and listened seriously with a serious face. After all, it was still far away. He had to make sure that it wasn't a false alarm from other small animals. The direction of the sound formed a right angle with the treehouse and the tent, but Poplar Fruit was sure that the direction of the sound was the river behind them, because he heard the movement more and more clearly. The sound of rustling, rustling, rustling was getting louder and louder, and it was accompanied by the sound of branches being broken. Poplar Fruit was more and more sure that whether it was an elephant or not, it was definitely a sign of a large animal moving around. Poplar Fruit's heart was still very calm, but he understood that he couldn't wait any longer. When he saw or confirmed the appearance of the target, it would be too late. "Shimin! Shimin!" Poplar Fruit hurriedly shouted twice and ran to Zhou Shimin's tent and shook it. Zhou Shimin was indeed an athlete. His reaction was fast. After Poplar Fruit shouted twice, he used his waist and abdomen to sit up. "Poplar Fruit, what happened? Hurry up, it seems like an elephant is coming." Poplar Fruit's voice had just faded away when they heard a familiar sound. Why was it familiar? Wasn't it the culprit that scared them out of their wits yesterday afternoon? The sound of an elephant. It really was an elephant. Zhou Shimin suddenly woke up. He also knew that something was wrong. He didn't have time to ask when Poplar Fruit came to keep watch. He quickly turned over the quilt and woke up Xian Xian. who was still sleeping soundly. Poplar Fruit didn't stay idle. He hurriedly woke up Lin Yongjian in the opposite tent. Professor Lin, wake up, the elephant is coming. What should they do next? Poplar Fruit didn't need to think. People came out of the tents at the side. Some were from the program team, and some were from the wild elephant experts. An experienced female expert shouted, "Everyone, hurry up the tree, go to the tree house. Hurry up." In fact, an expert was an expert after all. She had already determined that there was more than one elephant coming. After all, wild Asian elephants were social creatures. Poplar Fruit was still helping to check the various tents, but soon he was pushed by the expert and rushed to the safety of the treehouse. In a hurry, in the chaos, Lin Yongjian didn't wear shoes and ran with Dejun, who was still in a daze. Zhou Shimin was a little better. He at least wore shoes, but Xian didn't. It was too late. Under the urging of the experts, everyone quickly evacuated. The people didn't see it. Only the camera hidden in the tree recorded this thrilling scene. Almost less than a minute after the last person left, the branches and leaves at the corner of the camera swayed. One after another, 2 to 3 meters tall elephants came out one after another. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit's night watch woke everyone up in time. Everyone ran to the top of the treehouse. The elephants were separated by a fence. They weren't interested in chasing after the humans. They wobbled and walked to the river at the side. Their goal was to drink water. "Dad, why are we running?" Dejun was still in a daze. Because there are elephants chasing us." Lin Yongjian was still in shock. His bare feet stepped on the cold wooden planks in the morning. He hugged Dejun like this and didn't know to sit down on a chair at the side to rest. Poplar Fruit saw that everyone was safe. He smiled and patted Lin Yongjian and Zhou Shimin's shoulders to let them catch their breath. He went back to the house first. It was noisy outside. He didn't know if Kiki had been woken up. Poplar Fruit was very worried. He was worried that Kiki would wake up and cry if she didn't see him. That you're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.